Committee will come to order. Good morning. Thank you for gathering with us here this morning. The Ways and Means Committee has made it a priority to meet with Americans in their communities to learn about challenges as well as solutions that various folks think Congress should consider for the future. Already, the committee has traveled more than 7,000 miles to hear directly from Americans who are affected by our policies: workers, families, farmers, ranchers, small business owners, just to name a few. We've heard about high food prices. We've heard about supply chains and the challenges that manufacturers face, small and large. The challenges, small and large, and manufacturers, small and large. We've heard from real concerns coming from workers, families, farmers, and so many different perspectives. Earlier this year, the committee approved a jobs package, the American Families and Jobs Act, and that is a direct answer to what we've heard from working Americans. It's the actual rescue plan for those who need relief from high prices created by Washington spending, and it gives small businesses a fighting chance to expand and make America more competitive with China. In just 2 years, we will face a $3 trillion tax hike from the expiration of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Families making under $500,000, the exact same folks that President Biden promised not to raise taxes on, will be hardest hit. We welcome ideas for avoiding this looming fiscal disaster for families and small businesses. I might remind folks that TCJA left the House on a permanent basis with permanent policy. That didn't quite survive the policy or the process, so we will have to address that moving forward. We've got a lot of challenges. China and their desire to undermine our economic activity here in America, and I'm glad that we have various folks here today, members, colleagues, who are focusing on solutions. So I'll begin by recognizing Mr. Thompson, the ranking member for Ways and Means today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of our colleagues for being here today, both on the dais and at the witness table. This is an important chance for all of us to hear directly from our colleagues about their priorities. Our committee has an extremely wide mandate: taxes, trade, Medicare, Social Security, retirement, and other things. So I look forward to hearing from all of you and the other members who are scheduled to come in throughout today's hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We'll begin today in recognizing Mr. Collins from Georgia, here to perhaps carry the family mantle his father once served on the committee. We're glad you're here, Mr. Collins. Please begin.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, and thank you, Ranking Member Thompson. You know, earlier in the year when I made the comment in that field hearing in Georgia that y'all let me attend, and I said I feel like I need to be over there on the witness side more than over here. I didn't know y'all were going to take that literally. Next time I see you, I'm sitting over here. But that's all right. I want to talk to you about a bill that we have that is dealing with the aviation industry, which is actually 5% of the GDP. 125 trillion in revenue is what they provide. And it's obvious. I think most of you probably fly in and out of D.C. and you realize that the shortage and the aircraft delays and the flight delays, and we're addressing that shortage with what we call the Aviation Workforce Act, H.R. 1818. And why is that important? I mean, just because we have a shortage? Well, everybody knows the demand is up. More people are flying, more cargo is being moved around the country by air, and we have more pilots and aircraft mechanics today that are retiring faster than ever. And so we have to address that. And normally recruitment keeps up with that, but it's not. And there's two main reasons for that we see. One is military recruitment is down, and it has been down, and it'll continue to be down because of the socialistic agenda and objectives that the military is pushing in their hiring or recruiting process. And the other problem that we see out there is just a barrier to entry, the cost problem that we have. You know, it costs $90,000 to $100,000 at least to go out there and get a commercial pilot certificate. So, what we've done, as a matter of fact, I want to interject this. As a matter of fact, yesterday I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce. And when we got through speaking, the very first question they asked was, what are y'all going to do about the pilot shortage and the problems that we're having with aircraft not being able to even function when we get to the airport? And so I was able to tell them about H.R. 1818 and how we were going to testify today in front of the Ways and Means to see if there is an avenue to get this out. It is just a common sense, simple bill that deals with the 529 savings plan, which I'm sure you all are well aware of. And all we're doing is taking and injecting into those degrees and certificates now that trade schools are allowed to be in that part of that program, and just putting in there commercial airline pilot certificate and aviation aircraft mechanic certificate. That's all. And allowing people to use that money for their children to get that. As a matter of fact, one of the aviation schools contacted us here recently because they knew about it, and somehow parents are finding out about it, and they said they did a survey and over 50% of the people are already inquiring, can I use my 529 plan to put this child and get this certificate? So it's already out there. Y'all, we have 139 co-sponsors, very bipartisan. As a matter of fact, we have 8 members of the House Ways and Means, or 19% of the committee, that are already co-sponsors of this bill. So I encourage you, please take a hard look at it. We would love to have this bill passed out of House Ways and Means, got on the floor. We've got somebody sitting in the Senate right now ready to take this thing up and get this thing passed. It'd be a good bill, not just for the House. It'll be a good bill for America and for the American people. With that, I yield back, and I thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Appreciate your work on this issue. These workforce issues are certainly acute. The needs are so deep, and I appreciate your focus on this and focus on solutions. Next, we'll have Mr. Barr from Kentucky. You are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Thompson. I have the privilege and responsibility of representing Central Kentucky in the Congress, and it may not surprise you all that I'm going to talk about horses and bourbon, because that's what I represent, the horse industry, the thoroughbred horse industry, and the Kentucky whiskey industry. So these are yes, and Iowa corn goes into that bourbon. So let me first talk about horses. This is a $6 billion industry for our country, and we need to update some of our tax laws to continue to encourage that investment. So first, the Racehorse Cost Recovery Act is before this committee. The legislation makes permanent the modification of accelerated depreciation allowance for racehorses to allow a 3-year recovery period for a racehorse. The default is 7 years, but the useful life of that asset is 3 years. And we need to make that permanent law. That's before the committee. We would encourage you to look at that, because that encourages investment in these very valuable racehorses, and it would encourage more investment that would, again, very much accelerate this dynamic industry. Also, the Racehorse Tax Parity Act, this would shorten the holding period for racehorses to be considered eligible for the long-term capital gains treatment. Oddly, if you realize a capital gain with a racehorse, you have to hold that asset for 24 months as opposed to the 12 months. This makes no sense. We need just to level the playing field on that asset class, make it a 12-month holding period in order to get that capital gains treatment. On bourbon, Mr. Thompson, Ranking Member Thompson, we're trying to replicate the wine industry. The bourbon tourism is exploding in Kentucky, just like Napa and Sonoma. We want to do what you've done, Mr. Ranking Member, and we want to continue to attract that kind of tourism to Central Kentucky the way you have in Northern California. And so one of the ways to do that is to fix some of these tax problems with the bourbon industry. One is the Duty Drawback Clarification Act. This bill would clarify that all whiskey products are commercially interchangeable and eligible for the drawback program by creating a single 8-digit harmonized tariff schedule for whiskeys. Under the current HTS, spirits categories such as whiskeys have several different HTS numbers at the 8-digit level. For example, Scotch whiskey and bourbon have their own HTS codes at the 8-digit level, meaning that these products are not commercially interchangeable for purposes of drawback. So when we import Scotch whiskey, that has a separate and different 8-digit code. We need to make sure that bourbon whiskey, a uniquely American spirit, again, a multi-billion-dollar industry growing every day, has that interchangeability with our imported whiskeys. When we can compete on a level playing field, Kentucky bourbon will definitely get into that market share in Europe and Asia, but we're punishing ourselves because we have this duty drawback disadvantage. And then finally, the rum cover-over. So the rum cover-over has expired, and the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico's rum distilleries work in tandem with many of our U.S.-based spirits companies. The territories, as well as the companies, all rely on the cover-over to meet their fiscal obligations, making the cover-over part of a tax package looking back to 2021 as well as forward would be the responsible course to cover. And if you want to help American spirits, American Kentucky bourbon, extending that rum cover-over would be helpful not only to the territories but also to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I see I have about 45 seconds left, and let me just take that opportunity to encourage the committee to fix this R&D tax credit. We've got a lot of manufacturers in central Kentucky. We need to eliminate the 5-year amortization requirement for R&D, and we need to continue expenditures in the taxable years in which they are incurred. That's going to make sure that we can compete with China in manufacturing. Also, I would also encourage you all to look at this Opportunity Zones Enhancement Act. The bill would create a tax exemption on interest income earned by tax-paying banks from loans extended to qualified businesses operating in Opportunity Zones. I know that you all have updated and provided some enhancement to the Opportunity Zones in the most recent tax package. From the position of the Financial Services Committee, tax-paying banks want that level playing field with credit unions. Give them a tax exemption to deploy private capital into these Opportunity Zones to help distressed areas. And with that, I'll yield.
Mr. Kelly?
You know, Andy, let's get together on that. You understand a lot of this stuff, and I think one of the difficulties when you get to Congress is you find out that people are making policy that have never been involved in the actual policy they're trying to make. When you talked about fine wines, Mike Thompson, right? He knows everything about it. When you're talking about banking, I don't think there's enough depth of knowledge and experience, but there is the talent to understand what you're talking about. I'd like to spend some time with you privately when you have an opportunity, do a little deeper dive on this so that I can understand it better. But I know you're on the right track.
Thank you, Congressman Kelly. And yes, indeed. So when your credit unions come and talk to you and your banks come and talk to you about the disparity in the tax treatment, this is a way to help level the playing field for banks, tax-paying banks. Give them an incentive to deploy private capital and not have to pay taxes on those loans, that private capital deployed to small businesses in Opportunity Zones. And this is the way to supercharge Opportunity Zones and also help those tax-paying banks.
Come to Erie, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I'll show you that whole thing in action. One of the most successful pieces that we did, of course, with the Opportunity Zones. That city and what they've done with the policy that we gave them that allowed them through private investment, not taxpayer investment, to complete. They did a 180. A thing that was falling apart now is a place of beauty and a place where business is thriving. So come with me to Erie sometime. You don't have to come in the summer. Well, wait, you better not come in the winter unless you bring snowshoes with you. But we're on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. You mentioned a variety of issues here, and I appreciate your engagement and look forward to working with you in the coming months. Next, we have Mr. Johnson from Ohio, a member of one of the newer committees in the House, the Energy and Commerce Committee. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me an opportunity to speak this morning. I come to you and the committee with a plea for help on behalf of the people of East Palestine. As many of you know, I represent the village of East Palestine, Ohio, the site of the train derailment and subsequent fire and chemical spill on February 3rd of this year, which has completely upended the lives of the residents there through no fault of their own. I've spent a significant amount of time in East Palestine since the derailment. The national media, for the most part, has left and the story has faded from the national news, but that doesn't mean that the problems are solved. Far from it. I've continued to be there every chance I get, meeting with residents and small business owners. Later this month, I'll be hosting an Energy and Commerce, Environment, Manufacturing, and Critical Materials Subcommittee field hearing in the village, where we'll hear from the EPA officials, community leaders, and the railroad regarding what happened, the ongoing cleanup efforts and actions being taken to address environmental and health concerns. As you would expect, many residents have taken a financial hit due to this disaster. We in Congress have an opportunity to play a meaningful role in helping them out. Back in March, I introduced H.R. 1270, a bipartisan piece of legislation called the East Palestine Tax Relief Act. Co-sponsored by 2 members of this committee, this bill ensures those that were thrust into this unfortunate situation will not have to pay taxes on any relief payments they've already rightfully received or will receive in the future relating to the accident. This includes direct payments from the railroad, any subsidiary, insurer, or agent of Norfolk Southern or any local, state, or federal agency. I believe this is the right thing to do. I urge my colleagues to support the residents of East Palestine by holding a vote on H.R. 1270 in the coming weeks, and I thank the committee. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Certainly the issues that you raise are important, and always trying to have a good tax policy and responsive tax policy in mind. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you for testifying today. As you know, this is an issue of great interest to a number of us in the House and on this committee. I think in the next panel or one of the later panels, Mr. Lamalfa from up in Butte County is going to testify. He and I have legislation dealing specifically with folks who received payments and are being taxed on those payments that don't even hold them harmless. And it's terrible. That particular bill, I was the lead author in the last Congress, and we passed it out of this committee, and it passed out of the House and went over to the Senate. And as you know, Senator McConnell said no to all tax bills in the 11th hour. So hopefully we'll be able to put these together. We'll be able to move all these disaster bills. We'll be able to move them over to the Senate, and we'll get more cooperation because, like you, I have constituents that are really hurting. And it's not just in Ohio and California. It's in states across the country, and we have a responsibility to help those people. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your input today. Next, we have Dr. Dunn. Dr. Dunn is here to share his insight. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Thompson. As a member of the China Select Committee, it's become clear that strategic competition with China is one of the defining issues of the 118th Congress. Reducing American reliance on China is a shared policy goal of many across the bipartisan political spectrum, as well as many American companies. In July, Mr. Auchincloss and I, joined by 64 members of Congress, including every single member of the China Select Committee, sent a letter to this committee underscoring the necessity of legislation to facilitate the supply chain shifts out of China. Specifically, it addressed the renewal of the generalized system of preferences on tariffs. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your attention to this and your staff's attention to this letter. The GSP is one of America's oldest and largest trade agreements. It has been renewed by both Democrat and Republican administrations since 1974. 59 years, we have never failed to renew this until 2020, when we failed on December 31st, 2020. So it has lapsed for that long. The GSP boosts economic development by removing tariffs on non-sensitive goods from 119 different developing countries, all of them putative friends of America. China is not a qualified country, but thanks to our gridlock, the GSP expired in 2020, and the last vote, I would note, on the GSP renewal was 400 to 2. So, I mean, this is a very popular bill. I'm confident that GSP renewal legislation will be delivered under the Chair's leadership and on Ways and Means Committee. Without it, billions of dollars in additional costs from current tariffs will be transferred to American companies and consumers. Right now, American companies are forced to choose between hiking prices, absorbing the profit cuts, or finding cheaper places to manufacture, places like China. Our failure to renew this GSP moves international manufacturing to China. In addition, China exploits U.S. trade laws, gaming our de minimis system. With a tax and duty-free threshold for all imports set at $800, China plays trade games at our expense. I'm proud to co-lead H.R. 4148, the Import Security and Fairness Act, with Mr. Blumenauer of this committee. This bill would have the effect of removing Russia and China from receiving de minimis benefits. Why do communist and authoritarian countries who seek to undermine the United States get a non-reciprocal trade subsidy? At the same time, some United States businesses and workers struggle to make ends meet in today's economy. The CCP and Russian exporters receive American charity that they do not deserve. I encourage my colleagues on this committee and throughout Congress to support the Import Security and Fairness Act, and please put an end to this. I'm confident we can do that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn, for coming to our committee today. Pleased to recognize Mr. D'Esposito from New York. Mr. D'Esposito, appreciate your opportunity to come here and to talk about an issue I know that's extremely important to you.
Well, I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to not only Chairman Smith, but other members of the Committee on Ways and Means. Thank you for giving me and all of us the opportunity to speak here today and to advocate for Congress to lift the current cap on the state and local tax deduction, also referred to as SALT. Mr. Chairman, I also appreciate your open door policy to hear concerns of members from one end of this country to the other. My constituents from New York's 4th Congressional District sent me to Congress to provide meaningful tax relief to local families. And one way I plan to deliver that relief is by removing the current SALT cap. Americans are suffering from sky-high inflation, rising gas and grocery prices, and out-of-control spending from the Biden administration. Removing the cap is one way House Republicans can provide Americans with financial support. I am proud to serve as the current vice chair of the House SALT Caucus, a bipartisan group of representatives determined to bring real relief to the districts we represent by lifting the $10,000 SALT cap currently in place for taxpayers filing their federal income returns. Since I came to Congress in January, I have advocated for the lifting of the cap. I joined my fellow Long Islanders, Congressman Andrew Garbarino and Congressman Nick LaLota, in sponsoring the amendment to the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which would have restored the SALT cap to pre-2017 levels for a majority of Americans. I am also proud co-sponsor of the SALT Fairness and Deficit Reduction Act, which would significantly raise the SALT cap and would require an annual inflation adjustment to the increased amount beginning after 2023 and extending to 2032, the period during which the limitation is in effect. New York House Republican members are working hard to deliver this needed relief, not only for New Yorkers, but for all Americans, especially those in high-tax states. Raising the SALT cap will not just benefit high-income earners in New York, as many would want you to believe. In fact, a study conducted by the Government Finance Officers Association using IRS data found that nearly 40% of tax filers making between $50,000 and $75,000 in 2015 claimed the deduction. That is nearly 7.6 million households in the United States of America. If House Republicans are serious about reducing the burden of President Biden's fiscal policies, then I urge all of my colleagues to join me in supporting a lift to the SALT cap. Chairman, I thank you again for letting me speak to the committee, and I yield back my time.
Representative, thank you for coming and sharing your opinion. The SALT issue is quite interesting as it impacts areas of our nation much differently. I do want to highlight that your fellow colleague from New York, Ms. Malliotakis, has definitely, when we were marking up the American Families and Jobs Act, she's, I believe, one of the members of your SALT caucus as well. She was a huge advocate and shared a lot of very good points. So appreciate you being here.
I appreciate it, Chairman. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Ranking Member.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman for his informed comments on the SALT deduction. We've had that conversation here for a considerable period of time. The one thing that I think everybody's come to recognize, there is hardly an easy solution for the issue, although we crafted one at one time, and I hope that you'll have a chance to weigh in with members of the committee.
I appreciate that, Mr. Ranking Member.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask
Mr. Hearn.
Congressman, colleague, has there been an update to that since 2015 on the impact of SALT on the American people?
I believe there has. I don't have the numbers on me, but I'm happy to get it to you.
If you could get that, it'd be great.
Absolutely.
If you could get it post TCJ, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Got it.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Thompson.
I too want to thank you for raising this issue, but as Mr. Neal said, we crafted a response to this that would help, and it was not the Democrats that put SALT removal on the books. So I think you'd be better served to take the partisan edge off of this issue. There are folks on both sides who are working hard to address this. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your comments, but I wasn't here when this was put into place. I came to office in January, and that's what I'm going to focus on.
I realize that, but there's a history to this. I was here. I know that history.
I've read the books as well.
It's better to take the partisan edge off trying to address this issue.
Mr. D'Esposito, thank you very
Mr.
much
Chairman.
for being here. I want to thank the testimonies of all the individuals on the first panel, and you all are dismissed, and the clerk will please set up panel 2. Mr. Nunn, I believe you're the first one up. I'll now recognize Mr. Representative Zach Nunn, the gentleman from Iowa. Mr. Nunn is a 6th-generation Iowan and served for 2 decades in the U.S. Air Force and is currently in the Air Force Reserves. Mr. Nunn.
Well, Chairman Smith and members of the Ways and Means Committee, thank you incredibly for taking the time to hear from us, all members of this august body on both the Democrat and Republican side, to be able to fight for our communities back home. You obviously are tasked with one of the most challenging aspects of Washington, D.C., and making sure that our tax dollars are well invested and they're returned to our communities in a way that is both meaningful but helps to care for so many in our community. Mr. Chairman, I also want to commend you for your leadership on not just this committee, but importantly on making sure that wasteful spending in D.C. is put to a halt, ensuring that our families and small businesses can be successful, and like so many of you, that our farm families have the tools they need to succeed. As a father of 6 kids, we have brought on 2 foster children into our family. Recently, this year, we were able to adopt both Jaina and Aaliyah, two half-sisters that came to our family. I am privileged to co-chair the Congressional Caucus and foster youth. I have firsthand experience navigating this system and have realized through painful experience how challenging it can be for so many families in our community. In April, my wife, Kelly, and I brought these two young ladies into our family, and we have been blessed ever since. But it was a long and difficult road. This adoption opened our eyes to the challenges and shortcomings that exist within the system, despite great efforts by those trying to help this happen. And while we were fortunate to bring our daughters to their forever home, many never get that opportunity. Indeed, learning firsthand through the court experience, we saw grandmothers who tried to adopt their own grandchildren but found the cost was just too high and too expensive, watching their own family be stuck in foster long term. Agency attorney fees, as well as additional expenses, prevent far too many families in America today from being able to adopt a child. The average cost to adopt can go anywhere from a minimum of $8,000 up to $40,000 just to be able to provide a loving home. Oftentimes, grandparents, aunts, and uncles wanting to adopt their own biological grandchildren find it nearly impossible to access the financial assistance necessary to bring their grandchildren home. And this isn't even just amongst biological families, but people who want to do the right thing. To help with these high expenses, the federal adoption tax credit provides families with up to $14,890 per child. This qualified adoption expense includes everything from adoption fees, court fees, attorney fees, travel expenses, but even more tangible, the mental health, the reunification, the cost of bringing a new child into a family, oftentimes with other children. However, as currently written, this credit benefits only those who have a high federal income liability, making it difficult for retirees, low-income and middle-income families to adopt, let alone to be able to keep a foster child in their family. According to the U.S. Administration for Children and Families, there are over 400,000 children in foster care and over 100,000 waiting for adoption right here in the United States. Of this, nearly 500,000 children do not have a home or a family, causing instability, inconsistency, and lack of care. These numbers will continue to grow if families here in America can't afford to bring them into their home and costs both the taxpayer and these families even more. And so that is why, Mr. Chairman, I've been proud to introduce H.R. 2510, the Fight for Families Act. This bill would amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 and make federal adoption tax credit permanent and fully refundable to families who adopt disadvantaged children. This includes children who cannot return to their parents' home, as well as children in which the state has determined that certain factors such as their background, age, medical condition would prevent a family from adopting them without financial assistance. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit to the committee for the record a graphic from the Congressional Research Service 2020 report on adoption tax benefit.
So ordered.
Thank you, sir. According to the CRS, families with an annual adjusted growth rate of $100,000 and above receive roughly 66% of all federal adoption tax credit dollars. Yet families with an AGI of $50,000 or under, those middle-income Americans, receive just under 2% of all credit tax dollars. The majority of those receiving this credit can already afford to adopt. The Fight for Families Act incentivizes adoption for all families to ensure that their families of diverse backgrounds and kids have access to the federal adoption tax credit. This small change in our tax code will have a positive impact on making sure families are able to stay together in an extended biological sense, but also to make sure that more people have the opportunity to bring a child into their forever home. With that, I want to thank the committee today for their stellar leadership on all before us, and I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to help more children find their forever home by supporting this fundamental bipartisan legislation. I yield back my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nunn. I would like to highlight that there's a lot of interest in this committee in regards to looking at the refundability of adoption tax credits. Our ranking member, Mr. Danny Davis, has a piece of legislation for all in regards to adoption tax credits. It's co-sponsored by Republicans and Democrats on this committee. So there is a huge interest. Thank you for being here, but I believe Mr. Kelly has a question as well.
No, Mr. Nunn, I want to thank you for bringing that forward. I've always believed so strongly in the pro-life issues, and I always hope that the pro-choice people would choose life. I know there's times in people's lives when the opportunity to give birth is not in the, it's not in the right time at the right place, but if you can give people an option, if you can give people an option through adoption or foster care, I don't think there's any greater message that we can send to the world of who it is that we are. So thank you so much for doing that. And I don't want to get into a discussion about abortion because it becomes something that is a political football. Just the basics of my beliefs is that life should always be the first consideration. If we can give people the option and we can incentivize that and help them to bear the burden of what it is that some people face, why don't we look that way? That would be an incredible opportunity for this nation to really shine light on who it is that we are. So I really thank you for what you're doing, and I think all our members, while sometimes we can't talk about it politically, I know in our hearts we know what's right. So thank you so much. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak.
Anything for the chairman of the tax committee? This is important. So thank you, Mr. Nunn. We'll now move on to recognize Representative Chuck Edwards, the gentleman from North Carolina. Mr. Edwards serves North Carolina's 11th Congressional District and currently sits on the House Budget, T&I, and Oversight, and also a late happy birthday. I know your birthday was yesterday, so please proceed, Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and committee members. I really appreciate the opportunity that you're providing me and us to address a committee that we normally don't get an opportunity to have exposure with. I'd like to take this opportunity to speak on a couple of issues that are important to the citizens of North Carolina's 11th Congressional District, and issues that I believe are critical for the workforce and the economy of our nation. Today, I'd like to bring to your attention an issue with unemployment law that has played a role in the $163 billion of unemployment fraud estimated by the Department of Labor since 2020, and something that continues to plague business leaders in my district. In 2012, Congress established nationwide work search requirements for unemployment claimants. These requirements established the well-known mandate that a claimant must be available, able, and actively seeking work to be eligible for unemployment benefits. This provision has commonly been interpreted to mean a claimant must search for and accept work, but it leaves out the single most important part of a meaningful job search, and that is interviewing for the job. You see, many states conclude that if an unemployment claimant completes an application, that claimant has met the work search requirement. And if that claimant turns down work, they may no longer be eligible for unemployment benefits. But the fault in this process is if a claimant completes an application but does never appear or respond to a job interview request, they cannot be offered a job to accept or to turn down. I continue to hear from upset business owners who share their frustration with the constant scheduling of interviews only for an applicant to not show up. For one business that I'm aware in NC11, and for one position alone, they had 30 candidates apply and schedule an interview within a 60-day period with only one candidate actually showing up to the interview. These no-call, no-show interviews are draining critical resources for small businesses and are undoubtedly linked to the unprecedented unemployment fraud that we've seen over the last 3 years. Another employer in my district asked job applicants when they come in whether they'd like an application or whether they'd like a job. If they simply want to fulfill their weekly work search requirement, the claimant is given a yellow application, and the employer knows not to waste any time with that applicant. But if a claimant actually wants a job, they receive another color application, so the employer knows to give them serious consideration for employment. It's time that we stand up for American small businesses and the integrity of our unemployment system. That's why I'm working on a bill to finally codify showing up to an interview as a mandatory part of the job search while on unemployment, and to strengthen audit requirements so that we can better prevent ourselves against the further abuse of our unemployment system. As we approach the halfway point of the 118th Congress, I strongly encourage you to stand beside me for much-needed unemployment reforms to help more Americans experience the dignity of work and to help employers find the workforce that they so desperately need. Lastly, I'd be remiss not to take this opportunity to mention the importance of ensuring distressed census tracts, including brownfields and Superfund sites, be included in any extension of the Tax Cut and Jobs Opportunity Zone tax incentive, especially the Rural Opportunity Zone tax incentive proposed in the recent American Families and Jobs Act tax package. Complex contamination footprints frequently leave brownfields and Superfund sites like particular property in my district to sit undeveloped for decades. This vital inclusion of contaminated sites in any future Opportunity Zone programs will help to guarantee the tax incentive has the furthest reach possible and will achieve the goal of sparking economic developments across all census tracts and rural communities that are in need. Thank you again for allowing me this opportunity to testify before you today, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Pleased to recognize Congresswoman Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, the gentle lady from Puerto Rico. Ms. Gonzalez Colon is the delegate from Puerto Rico, the first woman to do so. And she was previously the youngest member ever elected to serve in the Puerto Rico House of Representatives. So it's a pleasure to have you before our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all members of this committee for having us today and for the opportunity to discuss how this committee can have an important impact in the economic growth and development of the island. Early this year, I reintroduced H.R. 3146, a bipartisan bicameral legislation that will modify the amount of money transferred to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands from the excise taxes collected on rum that is produced in or imported into the rest of the United States from the 2 U.S. territories. Puerto Rico's rum industry is one of the major drivers of our economy, producing more than 70% of the rum that is consumed in the United States and 80% of the rum that is consumed around the world. It results in more than $330 million for Puerto Rico every year, which has been vital to supporting critical services, including healthcare, education, public safety, and environmental and other conservation initiatives. Traditionally, excise tax collections on imported rum has been transferred to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands at the rate of $13.25 per proof gallon. However, only $10.50 per proof gallon is on the permanent law, which the remaining $2.75 per proof gallon requiring periodic reauthorization by Congress, a practice that has been taking place for the last 100 years. My legislation makes permanent the $13.25 per proof gallon to be covered by law, eliminating uncertainty and that both territories have experienced, including funding cliff on several occasions and ensuring resources continue reaching our communities and enhancing our long-term sustainable economic growth. This legislation will also require that a portion of the funds be transferred to the Conservation Trust on the island. Congress last extended the rum cover over for 5 years as part of the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018, which expired in December 2021. As such, I ask you consider attaching my bill to the forthcoming disaster relief legislation or any BAS bill. As the Congressional Task Force on Economic Growth in Puerto Rico made clear in this recommendation to Congress, and I quote, failure to extend the provision will cause harm to Puerto Rico fiscal condition at a time when it is already in peril. Another bill is H.R. 376, the Puerto Rico Film, Television, and Theater Production Act. The IRS incorrectly considers Puerto Rico as a foreign jurisdiction for purposes of federal incentives available to producers of films, television shows, and theater performance, making this incentive unavailable for works produced by American taxpayers in Puerto Rico. Another bill is H.R. 4026, that will make available in territories certain tax credits and deductions for the expenses incurred in complying with the American with Disability Act. That law allows a deduction for expenses incurred in removing barriers and making alterations to make businesses facilities more accessible to people with disabilities and for the elderly. To help businesses comply with these requirements, current laws allow small businesses to take credit on federal income tax return if they incur it for removing architectural, communication, physical, or transportation barriers that prevent a business from being accessible or usable by people with disabilities. Although the ADA is applicable in the territories, all these credits and deductions are not available to the territories as well. H.R. 4026 seeks to address this situation and improve the quality of independent life of people with disabilities in the territories by making the credits and deductions available to taxpayers in the territories. I'll be submitting an addendum to this writing that includes some of other bills such as H.R. 378, which will make all Puerto Rico eligible for opportunity zones, and H.R. 447 that will incentivize domestic medical manufacturing in economically distressed areas across our nation, which is a bipartisan and bicameral bill. I will close by marking an open invitation to the committee to come to Puerto Rico to examine the impact of all this legislation under just your jurisdiction and hear directly from residents and stakeholders about this. Thank you, and I yield back.
Congresswoman, thank you for your testimony before committee. Thank you for your hard work, dedication, and advocacy for the good folks of Puerto Rico. I now recognize Representative Burgess Owens, the gentleman from Utah. Mr. Owens is a former NFL draft pick and was a Super Bowl champion for my team's rival, the Oakland Raiders. He is founder of Second Chance for Youth, a nonprofit dedicated to helping troubled and incarcerated youth. Mr. Owens.
Thank you so much, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm here today to support legislation which is in the jurisdiction of both this committee and the Committee on Education Workforce, on which I serve. I appreciate the time provided so I can be heard on this bill. I'm here today to support H.R. 531, Educational Choice for Children's Act, or ECCA, which I introduced along with Congressman Adrian Smith of Nebraska. I first introduced this bill in the 117th Congress with our late colleague and friend, Jackie Walorski. Jackie was a joyful champion of policies to ensure every child had the resources and education they needed to succeed. This bill will be a fitting tribute to her legacy. As the child of two educators, I was raised in a family that believed strongly in the gift of education, its power to create greater social and economic mobility. By offering parents and students more educational options, we increase the opportunities to succeed, to empower the generations to come to make their American dream a reality. Our bill is based on a popular state-level policies which has been proven to work, like the Children's First Education Fund in my home state, and is designed to address the critics of direct government funding of scholarships. Because ECCA provides a refundable tax credit to support scholarships, it diverts no existing funding away from public school systems. It can be compared to other existing tax programs, such as low-income housing tax credit and new market tax credit. In order to ensure that no governmental participation in awarding scholarships for attendance at religious schools, ECCA tax credits and scholarships are directed through independent scholarship granting organizations, or SGOs. These SGOs will both allocate the non-refundable credits to donors and select families to receive the scholarships. To ensure students in all parts of the country, not just cities and suburbs can participate, SCGs may also offer assistance to supplemental educational assistance and supplies for families in need, not merely school's tuition. Ignorant and free can never be, to paraphrase, speaks to the understanding of our founders of the imperative nature of education. The right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness summarizes our nation's mission statement and the visions of a Heavenly Father that puts value on every life, regardless of race, creed, color, or zip code. It is time for us to look for innovative ways to ensure that every child has access to our nation's promise, regardless of zip code, income status, color, or creed. Unfortunately, for too many and for far too long, our children have been denied these rights. In 2017 report out of the state of California, 75% of the black boys in the state of California could not pass standard reading and writing tests. In Baltimore, across 23 schools, 0% of students show proficiency in math. In Memphis, Tennessee, this year, 75% of third graders were not proficient in reading. Only 1% was held back. Not being able to read, write, think, or to believe in our country that thrives on success, hard work, merit, risk, failure, and success and chances makes the pursuit of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness impossible. We're fighting today for the heart and soul of our nation. We cannot accept that intellectual and educational failure of our own children is the norm. This legislation gives a win-win in this approach and all in this process. A win for the parent and participate, in particular the poor minorities, to see their child reach their potential. A win for educational communities to allow competition and meritocracy, incentivizing innovation, increasing value. A win for the caring citizen donors, tax write-offs, and a win for our most precious product, our children, to become happy, visionary, and productive citizens for our communities and our country. I look forward to working with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to give these options of H.R. 351 to parents and children throughout our country. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, thank you, Mr. Owens, for your work on this bill. Obviously, I'm a little biased as well in favor of the legislation, but thank you for emphasizing students, the achievement of students, empowerment of families, and so many communities around the country. I've been pleased to see the engagement from stakeholders around the country, namely students, who are gathering, who are telling us themselves with their families what the needs are, and I am glad that we're able to work together on these solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Mr. Owens, education freedom is an important priority for this committee, and we, over the next couple months, will be having hearings in regards to this, and hopefully your legislation will be a part of that. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you. Mr. Owens, thank you for bringing this forward. I think what we've seen over the past couple of years is that parents want a say in their children's education, okay? And that's going to take a lot of different forms. And this bill provides some options that parents don't currently have right now. I think it's important to do this because when you tell parents that they aren't in charge of their children's education, it sends the wrong signal, okay? And it just flies in the face of the things that we love the most, which are our children. And so I applaud you for bringing this forward. You know, would look forward to. I'm glad to hear the chairman say that as we will make this a priority and move forward, that we hope that this will be part of that. It certainly seems like something that we can get behind and support. So thank you for bringing it forward, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your consideration of it.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. I now will recognize Representative Dan Muser, the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Mr. Muser is the former Secretary of Revenue in Pennsylvania, so he knows the responsibility of tax collection. So pleased to have you before the Ways and Means Committee.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very, very much. And I also want to thank the Ranking Member Neal and all members of the House Ways and Means Committee for giving me this opportunity to testify here. I would like to discuss my bill, the USA Batteries Act, H.R. 1594, which would repeal a recently imposed tax on domestic manufacturers, which of course hurts good-paying American jobs and provides an unfair advantage to, frankly, cheap imports from countries with very weak environmental and labor laws. The United States is the world leader currently in lead battery manufacturing. Unfortunately, the recent change to tax policy has given foreign manufacturers of such lead batteries an unfair advantage. As part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a Superfund tax was levied on 42 chemicals, including lead oxide, sulfuric acid, and antimony, which are the primary inputs for lead batteries. These excise taxes, which had not existed for more than 25 years, suddenly returned at twice the previously enacted level, alongside the Superfund chemical tax, which has forced American lead battery manufacturers to pay significantly higher prices for raw materials than foreign competitors. Mr. Chairman, this is squeezing domestic manufacturers, which of course forces Americans to buy from countries that frankly have very questionable labor laws. Additionally, these manufacturers are also faced with unprecedented economic pressures that I don't need to list here, supply chain disruptions, and workforce challenges. Lead batteries are used in everything from vehicles, telecommunications, defense, energy generation, and the list goes on. The battery industry is composed of many small businesses, employing 38,000 Americans across 38 states with an annual economic output of $33 billion. Pennsylvania's 9th Congressional District that I represent is home to two leaders in the lead battery industry, East Penn and Ernest, which combined employees are more than 20,000 in my district in Pennsylvania. So battery manufacturers as well can be found across the country in Missouri, Tennessee, and Washington. Lead batteries are a sustainable, perhaps even renewable energy source, as 99% of lead batteries are recycled for use in new batteries or other products. These batteries also provide 60% of the rechargeable battery market and are often used in a variety of green applications. So we must take steps to ensure that U.S. battery manufacturers have a fair playing field compared to foreign manufacturers that are mainly located in China. Currently, China accounts for 45% of the world's total production capacity of lead batteries and 75% of the world's total production of lithium-ion batteries. Placing burdens on American battery manufacturers puts us at a distinct disadvantage with our foreign counterparts, obviously, causing the U.S. to cede ground in yet another important industry. To correct this disparity, I respectfully ask the Ways and Means Committee to advance the USA Batteries Act, which would simply eliminate the Superfund chemical tax on lead oxide, antimony, and sulfuric acid, the main inputs in lead batteries. This would make the raw materials in batteries more affordable for American manufacturers, doing away with the unfair advantage as stated for foreign counterparts. In addition to my USA Batteries Act, I would be remiss if I did not mention that the need to restore full R&D tax credit. In 2021 alone, the U.S. battery industry invested $113 million in R&D to pursue the next generation of battery technologies. I was glad to see the restoration of the full R&D tax credit, including the Ways and Means passed Build It America Act, and encourage my colleagues to continue efforts to restore this important provision for small businesses. Additionally, bonus depreciation is set to decrease 20% annually through 2027, as you are well aware. And as you also know, we need to act soon because private sector innovation, especially within the small business economy, is at stake and could be hamstrung if they're not able to fully invest in R&D. So I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to testify, and I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Muser. We appreciate your testimony in regards to a lot of the tax priorities that we're trying to hopefully get past the finish line before the end of the year. But I appreciate all the members of this panel. We'll now dismiss it and then move to panel 3.
Mr. Chairman, would it be in order to move to approve Mr. LaMalfa's bill by acclamation?
You know, it is a priority, but I don't think that would be in order at this moment.
All right.
We'll now proceed with that note to Mr. LaMalfa. You see that you have some friends on both sides up here, but Mr. LaMalfa, he manages his family-owned farming business in Northern California, and is a former member of the. And he's leaving.
He's oblivious. Yeah. You heard nothing that we said about him.
Former member of the California State Assembly, and you can proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, sir. I was just had a family farm conversation that was going on as I was coming up here, so my paperwork was in a different spot. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and our committee members. I really appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you and talk about the many priorities that we all have here today. And I know that the committee has an intense scope of work to take on, so I do appreciate this time you've allotted for us here. So I want to talk to you about a really important piece of legislation for not just myself, but for my neighboring colleagues and others around the country that have added on from the initial bill that I'd introduced with my colleague, Mr. Thompson. And it really boils down to H.R. 4970 that we're entitled the Protect Innocent Victims of Taxation After Fire Act. It's been drafted to halt the imminent taxation of disaster aid for wildfire victims and survivors, of which we've had so many cases of this in Northern California, in my district, and Mr. Thompson's district, and some of our other neighbors as well, and in the West. So we have these amazing folks that I get to represent, these resilient survivors of multiple wildfires across Northern California. From 2015 to 2018, these fires were sparked, in some cases, by electrical transmissions lines that have destroyed nearly 30,000 structures, injured hundreds of residents, and killed more than 130 of our constituents. In the aftermath, survivors received disaster assistance from FEMA. So many of you on this committee probably know under the Internal Revenue Code of IRS, Section 139, this assistance is tax-free. In fact, the tax code offers a multitude of additional forms of tax relief disaster for victims, including Section 121 for excluding property losses, Section 165 for deducting casualty losses, Section 1033 for deferring involuntary conversions, Section 213 for deducting personal medical care costs. Those are a few, but I think you can see that the current established intent of the U.S. tax policy is to exclude disaster losses from taxation. So I bring up these other sections because survivors of the fires from 2015 to 2018 I mentioned earlier were also recipients of disaster aid payments from a special settlement trust created in 2020 when the power utility who caused these wildfires ultimately went bankrupt. Now, unlike disaster aid from FEMA, payments from this settlement are interpreted by IRS to be fully taxable as income. Fire victims will be taxed on these awards they've received from the utility, is the direction things are going to go here. And on top of that, the real insult to the injury, I guess, would be despite court-approved lawyers receiving between 25 and 33% of each payment of these awards, the recipients will pay the amount on the lawyer's income on this. They will pay the full amount on the lawyer's portion of the income. Unbelievable. Can you imagine what that's like for the fire victims? So even then, the effect of this do not end at the taxation component. If the disaster aid is registered as income, survivors could also face a significant loss of federal benefits. Supplemental security income, SNAP benefits, WIC benefits could all be almost eliminated in nearly these cases if they're interpreted as that their income is too high to now receive these. Healthcare subsidies would be dramatically reduced for those on the lower income scale. And believe me, many of these folks living in this area, these fire victims, are not on the high income scale. They're in homes that they could afford to live in. They're 50 years old or 70 years old, that they're going to have a hard time, very hard time replacing, especially since many of them were underinsured for modern building costs. So veterans benefits could be, especially on copays for prescriptions, those could be curtailed. If there's a possibility of seeking a federal student loan, they'll have to look somewhere else. So if this disaster aid is treated as income, the federal government's entire social safety net will bail out on these survivors, again, many of them who are on the low income scale. So it's not just exclusive to Northern California with my district and my neighbors' districts there. It has happened again in both Colorado and in Oregon. Protection offered by H.R. 4970 extends guaranteed relief and ease of mind to wildfire survivors anywhere in the U.S., California, Colorado, Oregon, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, Texas, and even now Hawaii. So it's a pretty simple piece of legislation. These payments, though not coming from FEMA, are disaster aid. Survivors don't have the resources to navigate our tax code. They deserve the simple, singular tax exclusion given to all other forms of disaster aid. Notably, the bill includes a no double benefit clause, which will allow survivors with the resources or knowledge necessary to use existing tax benefits to do so. Now, I do want to put a timeline on this, is that IRS did a good and a helpful thing in that many of my counties in California that have suffered disaster, the people in those particular counties designated IRS delayed their filing from April 15th till October 15th this year. So there's many folks that are waiting the legislation here, hoping that this could be complete before they have to decide upon filing October 15th. Are they going to have to include this benefit as income, or will it be non-taxable? So if they don't include it and it ends up remaining taxable, then they're going to have penalties and interest and all that. And if they do pay it, then they'll have to wait for a possible refund of that if it turns out to be a non-taxable event. So either way, you got folks really caught in the lurch on this thing with deciding. I appreciate that IRS did indeed move that time back to October 15th. So, but we would be really, really helpful for folks to be able to have this decided by October 15th in some fashion or other. So this committee listening to this today is very important to me, very important to those constituents, and with that, I'll yield there. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're glad to have you here. Mr. Thompson from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. LaMalfa, thank you for bringing your priority bill before our committee. And as you know, I share in this with you. This committee and the House passed this bill in the last Congress. It was my bill then, and now with majority change, it's your bill this time. We worked well together on that last time, and as I mentioned, it's a priority for both of us this time. And I've talked to the chairman, the ranking member, and I think you have tremendous support on this committee. This is a tragedy that has been multiplied for thousands of constituents of ours and other districts across our great country. The idea that you would lose a loved one, you would lose your business, you would lose your house, and then you get a settlement that doesn't even pay to make you whole, and then they tax you for that. I mean, it is absolutely outrageous, and we owe it to every American to address this. So thanks for bringing it before us, and I'll keep pushing on the committee, and I know you will too. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your commitment to work on this.
Thanks so much, Mr. Thompson. It's been a real pleasure to work with you on this. And as you know, we have 85 deceased people in the Paradise Camp Fire, and now as we take on the situation with the horrible tragedy we have in Lahaina here, that I hope we can get this rectified for whatever the effects will be. So thank you so much, committee members, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. LaMalfa. I do know Mr. Thompson and also Mr. Stubbe definitely care about the disaster tax relief, and it's something that we hope to get resolved before the end of the year. I now recognize Dr. Julia Letlow, the gentlelady from Louisiana. Ms. Letlow is the first woman to represent Louisiana in the House in 30 years and is the former Director of Education and Public Safety at Tulane University School of Medicine. Ms. Letlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having me and Ranking Member. It is an honor to be here with you all. I usually don't speak extemporaneously at things like this, but I just wanted to come and try to share my heart and the heart of my constituents. I serve 24, we call them parishes in Louisiana instead of counties, and that is a lot of geography to get to. And I have to share with you that wherever I go, wherever small town I'm in, I hear about this complaint more than anything else. And it's the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset. And so what I've learned in my brief tenure here, a little over 3 years, is that sometimes we can implement things with the most wonderful intentions at heart. But sometimes those lead to unintended consequences that we never saw coming. And so I'd like to share with you some of the stories that I hear from my constituents. And these are public servants. And it affects 17 states across this country, but in Louisiana alone, it's close to 3 million people. So when you think about public servants, I think about my teachers who are teaching our children. I think about our firefighters or police officers. They are not bringing home huge salaries. So you can imagine their retirement pension is not this huge number. These are not wealthy executives coming to me, sharing their heart with me. These are people like Kevin, who was a firefighter for his whole career. And you can imagine, so this penalty has been in place for as long as I've been alive, a little over 40 years. So he comes to me, he was making close to $20,000 to $30,000 a year annually for his salary. So he did the right thing for his family. He sought supplemental income. He went to the private sector and also worked and put in 40 quarters, paid into Social Security the whole time. And so then he goes to retire and goes to collect his benefits from Social Security and finds that they have been slashed by 60%. These are our public servants. I'd also like to share with you a handwritten letter that I received from Carla from Bunkie, Louisiana. She also included a picture of her husband that she lost at 60 years old to cancer. Now, this hit home to me because I'm also a widow. And when you're widowed, the first thing that comes to your mind is, how am I going to support my family? And so because Carla chose in her life to be a teacher in the public school system, she gave of her time to teach our children. Simply because of that, she was not eligible to receive 2/3 of her survivor benefits from her husband's death through Social Security. 2/3. Carla would have done better by just staying at home and not serving our children. I can't tell you that's 2 of the 40,000 Louisianans and the 52,000 alone. Those are all the stories that I hear of every day. And so I just want to share them with you. I can share countless others, but I also want to work with you to try to find a solution. I know that something that we implemented over 40 years ago, that when we put our brilliant minds together, that we can come up with a solution to fix this for the people that are suffering truly. And so I'll do anything, please, just let me know. But you all have the means and the wherewithal to fix this for my constituents and for countless others. And I know it doesn't affect every state. But Americans are hurting, and I believe they send us to Congress to fix problems just like this. And so thank you for giving me the time to share my heart and share the heart of countless other Louisianans. And if I may transition to one other thing, I also want to plug this amazing bill, the Educational Choice for Children Act from Adrian Smith and Burgess Owens. I am so excited about this bill. It's the next step for the Parents' Bill of Rights, because it encourages school choice for our parents and gives that tax credit. So I also wanted to plug that. Coming from higher education is my background. And I don't understand why in higher ed we attach money to the student. Why are we not doing that for elementary education? So I also wanted to plug that. I forgot to mention, too, that I also wanted to plug HR 82 that goes back to WEP and GPO. So we finally just got 291 co-sponsors to that bill. So I'm hopeful that maybe you will bring it up in this committee. It's Congressman Garrett Graves and Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger who are leading that charge. I know my constituents and I would be so grateful if you would also consider H.R. 82. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Letlow. I received a text message from Congressman Graves telling me of the 290th co-sponsor. So you're at 291, so
yes, sir.
You're updating me more than he is. I would love to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Neal.
Well, I hope the chairman's going to take up the gentlelady's suggestion on this legislation. We've worked on this for a long time. You really did a good job. It's complicated.
I know.
I mean, it is really complicated.
Yes, sir.
It's important to recognize that many of the employees that you've described who are caught in this web,
right,
previously they and their sponsoring organizations opted for that provision of not paying into the Social Security Trust Fund, only to discover at a latter stage of life, as you've accurately described,
right,
that all of a sudden they are paying into it.
right.
So I think it's fair to say that there are some of us who have earned a PhD on this very issue.
Wow.
Because we've gone at it for so long.
That's right.
Mr. Brady and I were really close about 7 years ago. Thought we had a solution up until the very morning of the vote on the House floor on a Friday, when he came to me and said, look, Rich, I think I've got to pull this down today. I think it might get defeated on the House floor.
Right.
Mr. Larson has done great work
Sure.
on this issue. It is a geographic issue rather than a philosophic issue.
Right.
And Mr. Gonzalez is shaking his head because he's from Texas. Mr. Higgins, Mr. Larson, myself, I think the chairman, California, it's a substantial issue, and we would like to address it. Part of it is the complexity of what's happened in the congressional scoring system.
Right.
My colleagues on the other side, it would be hard, I think, to get them to vote for something that called for a tax increase down the road. And on our side, scoring now, these are both esoteric terms, scoring on our side conceivably could be used as the argument that somehow we were in favor of a cut in Social Security. And therein lies the dilemma.
Right.
So we've gone back and forth on this for a long time. Your perspective is very helpful. We want a solution. It is likely to be something a bit different than what you've described. And at different intervals, Mr. Pasquale has been a terrific advocate on this issue. But there is pretty broad bipartisan support based on geography for finding a solution. And I hope that maybe some of us could put philosophy to the side and try to address this, because in both instances that I previously described, these are changes that would occur 75 years from now, according to congressional scoring. But I think that the enmity that exists in the institution today gets in the way of what could be a pretty good policy solution. Massachusetts is part of the challenge here. We want to be helpful. I have filed legislation that Mr. Brady at least quietly supported. He filed legislation that I quietly supported. The problem was trying to get somebody to publicly support it. But we do want a solution and invite you to participate with us.
Absolutely.
And I think it would call for all of us to sort of, as it relates to the prospects of increases or cuts, kind of lower our voices and try to find a solution. We've had the Social Security actuaries in, which might be a good thing for the committee to do again, so that we could really drill down on what the solution would be. We also thought that at one juncture that we had a solution from the Social Security actuaries where there would be no cuts and there would be no tax increases.
Right.
So invite the gentlelady who did a really good job, and I understand the extemporaneous manner in which you offered it, because it was really well done. We know the problem, and the solution should not be that elusive, so I thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member.
I think the ranking member, I would have to agree with almost everything you just said. So that's a good place for us to be. But I also agree that no American should be penalized because of their public service or participation in a Social Security replacement program. So, Dr. Letlow, we appreciate you being before us, and it's something that this committee is determined to figure out. So, thank you.
Thank you for your hard work. I appreciate your time.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh,
may
Mr.
I
Ferguson.
make a comment
Yeah,
on
you
this?
should. You're the chair of Social Security.
And I'm sure my colleague, Mr. Larson, may want to weigh in on this as well. And
Oh, yes.
Dr. Letlow, it's nice to call you that. This is a complex issue, and there are two major issues that I see here that somehow or another we've got to navigate. The first one, the ranking member touched on, which was the ridiculous scoring rules that we have put in place for ourselves that really prohibit intellectually honest conversations from occurring because things get labeled something that they're not. And I think if we could do one thing that would absolutely change the way that this place worked and help our country, it would be to change the budget process and the rules that we operate by. It is the most broken process in America, hands down. That's over there. The one thing that I would say is that when we look at this, we can't just address this issue in a vacuum. It has to be addressed within the context of all of Social Security. And so, I hope, as we move forward, that we get the chance to talk about this in the totality of really saving the most valued program in America right now. The real challenge that we have is, as you know, is that we keep running out of not only time but money to solve these issues. We just simply, if you look at our national debt right now, you look at our spending, all of those things, the constrained revenue coming in and with relation to Social Security, we've got to look at this in the context of the whole program. So I agree with the chairman that it's not fair to penalize our fellow Americans, but we don't want to penalize all Americans by just addressing this. We want to do it in the context of the entire Social Security system. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative. I so appreciate your compassion and your enthusiasm to fix this problem. It probably might surprise you to know that Congress has not enhanced Social Security in more than 52 years. In fact, Richard Nixon was the president the last time the United States Congress enhanced the program. Now, this is something that can't be done through executive order or otherwise. President Biden, who has called for the direct repeal of both GPO and WEP, this would be done. And it's not anything that can be adjudicated by the Supreme Court. It's Congress's responsibility. And imagine, how do you explain to the people in Louisiana that, yeah, we just didn't vote on it? Now, I believe in your district, what you have, something like 160,000 Social Security recipients. So if you look at 160,000 people who have not seen their benefits enhanced in 52 years, and they turn to you, and then when you look at some of the other issues, most notably unfairly, as you so well articulated, about that spouse inability to receive what her husband paid into the program. These are earned benefits that people paid for. These are not entitlements. These are earned benefits. And it's Congress's responsibility to vote on it. What an incredible thing to ask members of the United States Congress to do, to actually vote. If you got a better idea, put it out there. This is what we're all about. This is the best Social Security is the best economic development program that we have. Imagine getting a 2% increase in Social Security for everyone in your district, something that hasn't been done in 52 years. Some will say, well, in 83 we changed it. So yeah, we did. 83 we made it more solvent, but we did so by raising the age, which cut benefits. So if people are living longer, does it make any sense to cut their benefits so that they have less to live on? And here we have this economic development plan where every congressional district is advantaged by it. Imagine all the recipients in your district just on repeal of weapon GPO. But also there are 5 million fellow Americans worked all their lives, paid into the system, get below poverty level checks. While we're talking about giving out checks to billionaires, tax deductions to billionaires, and your neighbors and mine, the people we go to church with, family members, get zip. Your bill is welcome. All of these things need to be paid for, and they should be. The president has proposed we lift the cap on people making over $400,000. Wow. They would then be paying at the same rate that people who are making $30,000 or $50,000 are paying. But imagine that. Now, how much is that? How many Americans does that mean that would impact? 0.6%. And yet Congress has not voted. And this is a simple matter. You don't want to hurt the trust fund for everybody else, which is why states that aren't operating under this penalty, that's where they're coming from. You're going to decrease benefits to my people. So we need to come together. You've got the right approach and the passion. I hope you'll look at Social Security 2100 and reform Social Security so that all recipients, this isn't about Democrats or Republicans or unaffiliates, and across the board, 80% Democratic, 70% unaffiliated, 68% Republicans, enthusiastically support enhancing benefits, because you know what? Social Security has never missed a payment. We don't have to go back to 1929. All we have to do is go back to 2008, 2009 to understand when people saw their 401k become a 101k, Social Security never missed a payment. Not a pension, not a spouse, not a dependent, or a disability payment. Thank you for your support. I hope you'll take a look at our bill, but more importantly, I hope Congress will vote. Sam Johnson on this committee, all he asked for was a vote on his bill, and he couldn't get it either. We need to vote in Congress. We can't turn into the Senate that routinely turns down over 400 plus bills that the House passes or doesn't take up any legislation. Thank you again. You deserve to be commended.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. We would never want to turn into the United States Senate by any means. Dr. Letlow, thank you again for being with us. I now recognize Representative Vicente Gonzalez, the gentleman from South Texas. Mr. Gonzalez is a lifelong resident of South Texas and a member of the House Financial Services Committee. He's also the chairman of the Congressional Oil and Gas Caucus. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding today's member hearing. It's very important, and it's great to hear from other urging members that have similar issues. I appreciate the opportunity to speak before the Committee on Legislation that Congressman Kerry of Ohio and I recently introduced, H.R. 5073, the Promoting Domestic Energy Production Act. This bipartisan piece of legislation would fix a provision within the Inflation Reduction Act's new book minimum tax to allow intangible drilling and development costs, or IDCs, to be considered when computing adjusted financial statement income. It may sound complicated, but it's really very simple. IDCs have been included in the U.S. tax code since its inception due to the recognition that oil exploration and the development of wells are capital intensive and have significant risks involved. The domestic oil and gas industry requires continuous financing of labor, equipment, and the advancement of technologies. For example, when an operator drills a well, about 85% of the costs are intangible, with the largest share consisting of labor. IDCs allow for independent U.S. oil and gas companies to recover costs, which will be reinvested in their next operation. Tax deductions for IDCs are not subsidies for oil and gas companies or anyone else, as some may believe. Let me be clear. IDCs do not reduce total tax paid over the lifetime of the operation.
In fact, they allow for oil and gas companies to recover their intangible costs more quickly, thereby freeing up funds to reinvest in development, which helps create more American jobs. There is a long history of bipartisanship support for IDCs as important tax tools to encourage domestic energy production. We need to remember that energy security is American security. We cannot have what happened to Europe recently and is happening now ever happen to us here, even as we continue to transition to cleaner and cleaner energy. We must be reliant on our own production rather than foreign sources. And that means ensuring our domestic oil and gas production does not dwindle. Our country must be ready to face the energy challenges of the next few decades. And as President Biden himself acknowledged during his State of the Union recently, we are still going to need oil and gas for a while. That is some common sense. And this common sense bill promotes our nation's domestic energy production, our capabilities, something many of us have called for in the wake of Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. This legislation ensures we keep and create American jobs, lower energy prices, and decrease our dependence on foreign energy. We aren't asking for a handout for the energy industry. We're asking for the energy sector to receive the same treatment as other capital-intensive industries. Not doing so puts American energy at a global disadvantage. Energy independence is a foundation of a strong nation and economy, impacting almost everything we do, making the issues of oil and gas industry face a matter of national security. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to co-sponsor H.R. 5073, the Promoting Domestic Energy Production Act, to ensure domestic energy production can continue to nurture America to lead the world. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Gonzalez, thank you for being here. I appreciate the work that you have been doing with Congressman Kerry of our committee as well, and it was a pleasure to have your testimony. I now recognize Representative Trent Kelly, the gentleman from Mississippi. Mr. Kelly currently serves as Assistant Adjunct General for the Mississippi Army National Guard. He's received 2 Bronze Stars, among many other awards in his service, and it's a pleasure to have you before the best committee in Congress.
I think you have to be tough. I'm surrounded by Gonzaleses from Texas. Thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal, for the opportunity to speak in support of my bill, H.R. 1755, the Uzbekistan Normalized Trade Act. My bill would remove Uzbekistan from Title IV of the Trade Act of 1974, more specifically the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, and in turn grant Uzbekistan permanent normalized trade relations with the United States. Originally, the Jackson-Vanik Amendment was a provision regarding Jewish immigrants freeing from the USSR. Because the Soviet Union no longer exists, the Jackson-Vanik Amendment is outdated and needs to be updated. This provision has become a roadblock in furthering our relationship with Uzbekistan and unfortunately has devolved into a point of leverage to gain concessions. Uzbekistan has made meaningful constitutional reforms regarding women's rights and free market access, which have encouraged foreign investment in Uzbekistan. Militarily, Uzbekistan has assisted the United States in withdrawing from Afghanistan and has a robust state partnership with the Mississippi National Guard. Building a strong political and economic partnership with the budding democratic government in Uzbekistan is key to the United States as the United States seeks to counter Russian and Chinese influence in the region. Uzbekistan is a regional leader in the region. While our adversary is preoccupied with this conflict in Ukraine, this is an opportunity for the United States to further deepen our relationship with the former Soviet bloc country. This bill would help further the domestic and international interests of both countries. Uzbekistan has made significant strides to implement strong, robust diplomatic and economic relations with the United States. As a matter of fact, I'm meeting with Senator Safayev, one of their chairmen in their Senate, immediately following this meeting. I would be remiss to point out that Mr. Gonzalez from Texas, the Democrat that was sitting to my right, is the co-chair of the Uzbekistan caucus with me and has visited, and several members of this committee have visited Uzbekistan with me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Neal, for time to speak today, and I urge the committee to consider H.R. 1755 in its markup.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We appreciate you joining us. I now recognize Representative Tony Gonzalez, the gentleman from the great state of Texas. Mr. Gonzalez was a cryptologist in the United States Navy for 20 years, and with deployments across the Middle East and Asia, he currently sits on the Appropriations Committee and the Homeland Security Committee. Thank you for being with us, Tony.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal, for leading this committee and letting me testify today. I appreciate the opportunity to share my passion for helping foster youth. When I was 5 years old, my mother and I left an abusive home in the middle of the night, and we spent time in a battered women's shelter. Today, thankfully, my mother lives with me, and she helps Angel and I raise our 6 children. My wife, Angel, has a similar story. She was a foster child herself and makes it a point to try to find ways to fix the foster care system in a manner that brings everyone together. Unfortunately, my story does not have the same happy ending for thousands of children in foster care today. Not only are foster care standards far from what they should be, thousands of children in foster care have gone missing from state foster care systems and cannot be located. As a member of the Congressional Foster Youth Caucus, I believe there are ways to address this issue and ensure that our nation's foster youth receive the care they deserve. This is why I introduced the Find and Protect Foster Youth Act, which would help remove obstacles in identifying and responding to children who go missing while in foster care, which are also known as runaways. The issue is that the data on runaways is often inaccurate and in some cases preliminarily closed. Long-term data analysis suggests the runaways episodes are actually much higher than what is shown on record. Currently, state and tribal governments are not required to include plans for locating any child missing from foster care, nor are they required to report those findings. The Find and Protect Foster Youth Act addresses this issue by requiring the Department of Health and Human Services to find obstacles in identifying and responding to missing children in existing foster care system. The bill seeks to accomplish this by requiring an evaluation of states' protocols to determine the location of the missing foster youth, a report to Congress on the results of that evaluation, and screenings for children who return to foster care to determine if the children were victims of sex trafficking during their absence. This is only a start, and much more has to be done, but I am grateful for the opportunity that you're giving a voice to so many that feel voiceless. Thank you, Chairman, and I yield back.
The Ranking Member.
I want to thank the gentleman for bringing that issue to our attention and the considerate manner in which you delivered it. One of the great stories of Congress is how people got here and what their backgrounds are and how they were raised, which in most instances inform our decisions. So I have a very similar story to the one that the gentleman offered, and while not wanting to make everybody familiar with it, many people know of it. Much dependent on Social Security survivor benefits. Grandmothers and aunts were all involved in that raising of myself and others. But as you've described it, there are extraordinary challenges that confront people every single day. But I'm pleased that you were able to bring your own experience and tell your own story, because in the end, that's what helps move Congress in the right direction. So I thank the gentleman.
Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tony, well, quick question. So this is basically on tracking foster youth that just have disappeared from the rolls, or, you know, and my wife and I have gone through the process of getting certified in our time trying to adopt kids. But some of the issues around it are much bigger. Our incentive on family reunification that often is not actually the best thing for the child. Do you think this, or should we try to do something more global?
Yeah, this is a start. Thank you for that question. And what we're seeing is some states track runaways. So let's say someone's in the foster care system and they run away, which is more common than people realize. And then when they come back, there's nothing that tracks that they were ever gone from the system. Some states do it, some states don't. So it essentially goes, while you were gone, what happened to you?
So
why did you leave?
You're looking for a standardization.
A standardization that identifies why they left. In some cases, maybe the foster care, the foster home that they left wasn't the right setting, or and what happened when you were gone. You know, it's usually they're homeless or they're in a very vulnerable situation. So it tracks that to identify how do we prevent foster children from running away, and then when they do come back, how do we give them the services they need if they did experience any trauma while they were gone.
All right, thank you, Tony. I know in Arizona we still have a real shortage of families willing to do this. So we want to make sure you do it in a way where you're continuing to get people willing to take kids into their home and go through the certification process. So yield back.
Mr. Gonzalez, thank you for your testimony. Your bill draws attention to an important topic focused on protecting our foster youth. That's our responsibility. We need to get the job done, so thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for all for your testimonies. We will now move to panel number 4. I now recognize Representative Bruce Westerman. He's the chairman of the House Natural Resources, was a 4-year walk-on football player at some university in Arkansas, and a member of the Arkansas General Assembly, and is an engineer and forester by trade. It's a pleasure to have you in the People's Committee.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal. It's an honor to be here, and go Hogs. You caught me off guard a little bit with that opening. It's great to be able to participate and have this opportunity to visit with my friends in this important Ways and Means Committee Members' Day hearing, and I appreciate you doing the hearing. As you know, one effort that I've been proud to lead is the Trillion Trees Act. It's a bipartisan proposal that seeks to establish the United States as a global leader in the 1 Trillion Trees Initiative. This bill does a lot more than just plant trees. It's about planting trees or afforestation. It's also about taking care of the existing forests that we have to make them vibrant and healthy. And it's also about using wood products to store more carbon. And one way to think of that is wood is kind of like a battery for carbon. Photosynthesis is the oldest, most efficient, most effective way of taking carbon out of the atmosphere. Teddy Roosevelt called trees the lungs of the earth. Through photosynthesis, trees pull in carbon dioxide, they store the carbon in the wood, and they exhale the oxygen back for us to breathe. And the interesting thing is we're in this beautiful hearing room, got all this nice wooden dais and furniture in here. 50% of this wood was atmospheric carbon at one point in time. It was atmospheric carbon that a tree pulled in, converted it into hydrocarbons, stored it in the wood, and as long as this wood is here, this carbon is stored here. Now, where these trees were sustainably harvested, hopefully, where this timber was cut, a new tree grew back, and it's out there storing carbon today in that same space. So it's very important that we keep forested lands and that we're able to utilize the ability of the land to perform photosynthesis through plants and store the carbon. But it's also important that we utilize wood products kind of like a battery. You know, we talk about carbon capture and sequestration. Well, nothing captures carbon and sequesters it better than wood. Some of our oldest structures in the world are actually wooden structures. The other part that's so fascinating about trillion trees is there was a study done a few years ago that said that if we planted 1 trillion trees globally, we would sequester 205 gigatons of carbon. That's an amount equivalent to 2/3 of all the carbon emitted by man since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Now, people will argue that number and say, well, that's too high or that's too low, but the fact is it's larger scale than anything else that anybody has talked about. And it's something that's readily available that we should be working on. Now, for all the tree folks out there, there's about 3 trillion trees in the world. Scientists tell us there have been as many as 7 trillion trees, and we have about 300 billion here in the United States. So we can't plant 1 trillion trees in the United States, but we can certainly do our part to plant more trees and to take care of the forest that we have. And that leads me to the reason I'm here at the Ways and Means Committee. I've been working with Representative Ferguson, who comes from a tree state, great state of Georgia, and they get it there in Georgia. They know, just like we do in Arkansas, that we harvest a lot of trees, but we're growing more trees than we're harvesting. So the amount of wood in Arkansas and Georgia and other states is increasing every year. And the greatest threat to deforestation is development. So to prevent or to keep forests forested, we need to have markets for those products. And that's why we're proposing that we don't create a new tax credit. We just make products like mass timber available for existing tax credits, such as those under Section 45L and under Section 179D. Wood is not only a great store of carbon, it also is a great insulator. And when you make mass timber, it's really thick panels that creates a very high insulation value envelope for a building. So that's the reason I'm here. I'm out of time, and we'd be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Westman, thank you for being here today. As you pointed out, we've got an excellent opportunity in front of us to do something really good for the environment and really good for our economy simultaneously. And when you look at the ability of Americans to innovate and to create, one of the things that we can lead the world on is mass timber, and using that to help with, as you mentioned, the sustainability of our forest, making sure that we have markets for the end user. But we are facing some real challenges related to housing availability right now. Using mass timber in the residential area looks like it could provide some solutions to that, because you can build houses more quickly and more affordably doing this as this industry continues to grow and ramp up. So many times I think mass timber is viewed as building 10-story skyscrapers. We need to open up these markets for individual consumers in the home section, and also the very small commercial where concrete and steel aren't the primary choice for building. You bring up something that's very important, and I think it should be talked about one more time. One of the biggest challenges that we have with energy usage is the inefficiency of homes because of poor insulation. And if you can build homes using mass timber that have a greater have a greater R value, you wind up saving a significant amount of energy in our baseline load and our baseline capacity and the energy that we're going to need for a lot of other stuff. So I am excited about the possibility of making this product available through the existing tax credit system with the changes that you've recommended, and look forward to, as we move forward, to supporting this effort in the committee. That, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you're sitting beside another guy who knows about timber. And we talk about Pennsylvania, people say, oh, yeah, you guys, big steel state. No, that's not what biggest product we have. They say, oh, yeah, you guys are into coal and natural gas. I said, well, yeah, that's part of the deal. It's timber. Especially, I think, GT, I'm right, I think it's the black cherry is one of the valued timbers that we have. But again, management of this valuable resource. And Bruce, I really appreciate when you talk about the contribution, again, to our environment. You all teaching us about something we have absolutely no idea about is incredible. I'm so glad you're on the committee and that you're here serving in the Congress, because I don't know if anybody ever served here before that had the profession that you were already in. So I know when Freddie Keller wasn't able to run, Freddie Keller is another guy. It was all about timber. It was all about wood, and really just hanging around with him and would talk about it. I was amazed by what I didn't know. So, and I know GT feels the same way about it because we talked about it many times. And thank you for being here, and thank you for bringing it up and bringing it to our attention. Thank you,
Ms. Maliatakis.
Thank you. I just want to thank the sponsor for this legislation. I'm a proud co-sponsor of this bill. I think it is a practical, common sense, cost-effective solution, carbon sequestration, and also, as my colleague said, can help the economy as well. And so it's a win-win, and I think that it really makes sense for us to move this bill forward, and just appreciate the gentleman's time.
Thank you, Chairman Westerman. We appreciate your time in our committee.
Thank you, Chairman Smith.
I now recognize Chairman G.T. Thompson, the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Mr. Thompson is the proud chairman of our House Agriculture Committee. It's great to have you here.
Well, Chairman Smith, thank you so much. Ranking Member Neal and members of the House Committee on Ways and Means. Good morning, and thank you for providing the opportunity to share my priorities for the 118th Congress. And after spending nearly 3 decades as a therapist, rehabilitation services manager, and a licensed nursing home administrator, prior to coming to Congress, I've seen firsthand the importance of access to quality health care in rural communities. Today, I'd like to discuss a couple pieces of legislation before this committee that removes some of these obstacles and increase access, affordability, and quality of care for patients across the country. The first, H.R. 4315, the Medicare Orthotics and Prosthetics Patient-Centered Care Act, which would strengthen Medicare for beneficiaries who use orthosis and orthotics and prosthesis by reducing waste, fraud, and abuse within the Medicare program and expanding access to these critical devices. Medicare currently reimburses the drop shipment of custom orthotics and prosthetics directly to a Medicare beneficiary's home without any clinical guidance, training, or intervention from a provider or supplier. Now, this leads to rampant waste, fraud, and abuse within Medicare, as drop-shipped devices may not fit a patient's needs, do not work as advertised, may not be able to be operated without professional guidance, and quite frankly, with ill-fitting devices, can cause ulcerations and further expensive medical complications. Now, this legislation prohibits the drop shipment of all prosthetic limbs and custom fabricated or custom filled orthotics, potentially saving Medicare billions of dollars and ensuring that these beneficiaries have appropriate access to a healthcare practitioner to provide the necessary guidance. H.R. 4315 also expands access to replacement orthosis for Medicare beneficiaries. Currently, Medicare does not generally cover the replacement of a custom-fitted or custom-fabricated orthotic within the reasonable use lifetime of the orthotic. This forces beneficiaries to wait a long period of time before being eligible for replacements and undeniably delaying access to medically necessary care. This bill would also allow Medicare to reimbursement for a replacement orthotic device if the current orthotic device is broken or a new one is medically required. Finally, H.R. 4315 implements a zero-cost regulatory fix to allow certified or licensed orthotists or prosthetists to provide off-the-shelf orthotics directly to Medicare beneficiaries by exempting them from competitive bidding. Under the present system, orthotists and prosthetists without a competitive bidding license are required to send patients in need of an off-the-shelf orthosis to a colleague that has a competitive bidding license, adding an unnecessary barrier to care. This change brings orthotists and prosthetists in line with other providers like physical and occupational therapists and physicians. Also, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services they exempt those individuals from the competitive bidding process. So there is precedent within the industry. I respectfully urge the committee to provide for consideration of the Medicare Orthotics and Prosthetics Patient Care-Centered Act to reduce waste in Medicare and increase access to these devices for patients across the country. Now, I'd also like to turn to an issue impacting access to care for thousands of Medicare beneficiaries. As you may know, current Medicare law requires that patients have an inpatient stay of at least 3 days in order for Medicare to pay for prescribed care at a skilled nursing facility. There is a mounting concern and evidence that too many Medicare beneficiaries and their families are being saddled with insurmountable surprise out-of-pocket costs for stays at skilled nursing facilities because hospitals are caring for these patients under outpatient observation status. This billing technicality has significant repercussions for beneficiaries who are left facing either enormous unexpected post-hospital bills or avoiding the care and treatment their doctors have recommended. We saw the temporary waiver of these 3-day rule during the COVID-19 pandemic, and now it is time to take it a step further. H.R. 5138, Improving Access to Medicare Coverage Act, is a bipartisan legislation that ensures Medicare covers this doctor-recommended post-acute care by counting the time spent under observation status towards the requisite 3-day hospital stay for the coverage of skilled nursing care. Certainly respectfully request that the committee give full and fair consideration to H.R. 5138, and I've included in my written comments that have been submitted some additional priorities under the jurisdiction of this esteemed committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to be here and participate in your member day.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, for your presence. I am pleased to now recognize Representative Buddy Carter, the gentleman from Georgia. Mr. Carter is a pharmacist by trade and ran a pharmacy for over 30-plus years before coming to Congress. We're pleased to have you before us.
Thank you. I started when I was 10, so that explains that. Anyway, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to testify today at this Member Day hearing so that I can discuss before the committee some pieces of legislation that I'm leading and I believe are important. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to discuss my bipartisan bill, the Protecting Patients Against PBM Abuses Act, that will protect patients and pharmacies from harmful PBM practices that are making health care inaccessible and unaffordable for millions of America. First, before I begin, I'd like to put into context how powerful PBMs are. 3 PBMs control 80% of all prescriptions processed in the U.S. They own or are owned by insurers and have vertically and consolidated their businesses to own everything and everyone between themselves and the patients, including doctors, pharmacies, group purchasing organizations, and more. Yet PBMs do nothing more than process claims. They are just paper pushers, I like to say. They bring no value to the healthcare system whatsoever. It's time for Congress to do its duty and stop these PBMs from gaming the system and return the dollars they profit back to patients. That's why I urge the committee to support the Protecting Patients Against PBM Abuses Act. PBMs currently get compensated by charging fees calculated as a percentage of the cost of the medicine. This incentivizes PBMs to push the price of medicines higher by blackmailing for formulary access, or they choose higher priced medicines to put on their formulary. When PBMs have incentives to follow medicines with higher list price, it can lead to higher costs for patients who face cost sharing and deductibles and coinsurance that is typically based on list price. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that across the selection of so-called specialty generic drugs, Cigna and CVS prices were at least 24 times higher on average than roughly what the medicines manufacturers charge. This can also mean patients have fewer and higher choices when PBMs disfavor generic or lower price brand competitors. Delaying action on this any longer results in increased costs for patients. This is about patients, it's about patient cost. If we can delink administrative fees paid to PBMs from the price of medicines, this proposal will help to correct those misaligned incentives and bring relief to patients in the pharmacy counter. Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester and I are proposing this bipartisan bill that will help patients afford their medicine and protect them from harmful PBM practices. Another critical part of this bill is that it prohibits PBMs from reimbursing non-affiliated pharmacies at a rate less than they reimburse their own pharmacies. I think all of you are familiar with what I'm talking about, so I'm going to move on. I understand that this committee has not advanced the Protecting Patients Against PBM Abuses Act, but I would like to work with this committee to ensure that it's ready for consideration in a future markup. Another piece of legislation I'd like the committee to consider is H.R. 655, the Disaster Reforestation Act. As those on the committee may be aware, Georgia is our nation's #1 forestry state. This industry is important, providing thousands of jobs. Unfortunately, our nation's family forest landowners face threats on multiple fronts. As we've seen recently, natural disasters and fires constantly pose dangers to significant investments they make in maintaining forest land. The Disaster Reforestation Act would amend the tax code to allow forest owners to deduct the full market value of their timber prior to the loss caused by the federally declared natural disaster, as long as they replant. We don't want them becoming condos. We want them to replant and keep our forests in place. I'd also like to express support for the Help Independent Tracks Succeed Act, or the HITS Act. The HITS Act would allow independent artists and songwriters to fully expense the cost of making new music on their taxes. This is similar to how qualified film and television production expenses are allowed to be expensed, which we have seen thrive in states like mine. I'd also like to mention something very important to me, and that is the fair tax. The fair tax is incredibly popular. This is because the American people are completely dissatisfied with the current tax code. It's a convoluted, absurd system that punishes hard work. As a result, some 85% of Americans are frustrated by the complexity of our tax code. H.R. 25, the fair tax, will eliminate the federal income, payroll, and estate and gift taxes, replacing them with a revenue-neutral national 23%, not 30%, 23% consumption tax. Consumption tax. You decide on what you're going to pay. This is a good and great proposal that I hope that you will look at, this committee will look at. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your attention to these matters. They're all important, and I yield back.
Representative Carter, pleasure to have you here with your long priorities of legislation in our committee. It appears you probably are serving on the wrong committee.
Mr. Chairman, I take offense to that. I serve on the A committee, that is Energy and Commerce, the most diverse and oldest committee in Congress. But I have a great deal of respect for the Ways and Means Committee because of your consideration of these bills that I brought before this committee today. I cannot tell you the admiration I have for this committee. Thank y'all.
I would have to
say,
Representative, you're under oath, and lying under oath is not acceptable in this committee. So. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I now recognize Representative Victoria Spartz, the gentle lady from Indiana. Ms. Spartz is a great example of the American dream, and it's a pleasure to serve with you in Congress. And I know that you've spent a lot of time as an accountant, a real estate broker, and an adjunct professor before you came here. Thanks for being before our committee.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, as a CPA who knows numbers, I see too many problems here. But I do appreciate your willingness to look at very, very important issues. That is really not very sexy issues that you go on TV and talk about it, but important issue for every American where we have a huge problem. It's health care. It's an issue with competition and value in health care. 1 of 7 Americans is in debt collection due to medical debt. We have 1/3 of our spending where we have over 30 trillion of debt and running 1.5 trillion shortfalls, and which are going to be double within 10 years. And all 1/3 of it related to health care. Federal government created this problem. It's not a problem that created by lack of competition or created a problem that created monopoly problem. It's a natural monopoly. That is a monopoly that created by perverse incentives and barriers of entry that were created by federal government. So now Congress has to resolve this problem to the American people. If we want for American people to have innovative solutions that are going to improve their lives, it's going to improve our situation with debt, and it's going to save some funds, like Medicare, that is gone bankrupt. We can talk about all of this, appropriations. We can talk about reconciling our debt. We will never reconcile this debt without dealing with health care. And we will not be able to solve it just provided more choices, because if you have a couple oligopolies on the market, the choices will be very limited. There is no going to be competition. So I appreciate you willing to look at this issue. I also appreciate that we have Speaker McCarthy last year put Healthy Future Task Force and actually served on subcommittee on affordability. And we'll look at some solution and specifically look at one area. There are a lot of aspects of health care, but one area, over 50–60% of all spend is related to hospitals and doctors. 50%. So we can talk about, which is important, talk about drugs, pharmaceutical. We have to have more competition there. That's roughly 5–10%. Majority related, we are not willing to talk. And it's a tough conversation because we have very tough special interest group, love it. They build in Taj Mahals, have billions on Wall Street, and pay billions to the executives. And I'm not against them making money, but the problem is we're subsidizing it by taxpayers and bankrupting the country. It is unacceptable. And our debt and spending is a national security issue. And it's irresponsible for us, to pass it on to future generations. I know it wasn't created by just this Congress. I have completely understanding every Congress punted this issue. But we're reaching a point we cannot do it any longer. So I appreciate this Congress willing to do it. I truly do. So I'm going to I will put a package together with several bills. There are 3 of the bills, in front of your committee. And I'll briefly say what they do and why they're important. So I look at the areas where can we eliminate some of the, distortions that we created as a government. So I have 3 of the bills. One of them, HR 2862, Empowering Patient Choice of Medical Care Act, where we have so much politics, where bureaucrats and government decide which services should be performed inpatient, which outpatient. Each administration come and start mingling, then it's all politics. We should let doctors and competition decide. People have liability. They know better what is better for you and where services need to be performed. And politicians and bureaucrats sitting in D.C. do not know that better. Another bill is Prevent Hospital of Medicare, of a Billing of Medicare Act. What hospitals are doing right now, they purchase practices, and they were able, for the same doctor practice that they purchased, to overbill and bill facilities fees, but actually it's not allowed. It's defrauding really Medicare. Billions of dollars, over 100 billions, overbilling, and this fund is going bankrupt within 5 years. It's irresponsible. We need to save Medicare to seniors that we promised. So we have to stop allowing these practices. And I think this is what is dealing with that. And the third bill is dealing with nonprofit hospitals, so-called tax-exempt entity. We need to tighten the standards. I mean, actually, President Obama tried to do it and successful in Affordable Care Act, and IRS still say, you know, this entity is not paying taxes, not local, not state, you know, and they're not provided any charity care, not property taxes, and provide less charity care. You know, that actually some for-profit entities. So at least we need to tighten and define the standard, how you can be qualified for that, because, I mean, next business I'm going to have is going to be nonprofit because you don't pay taxes and don't provide value. I think IRS wants it, and this committee needs to look at that, want to give them status. So it's actually tighten that standard a little bit, and it says something needs to be, because that's a Congress decision, needs to happen. I appreciate your consideration. I would really appreciate your support of this bill. Thank you.
Congresswoman, thank you for being here. Thank you for your passion on some very important issues to our country and our country's finances. I now recognize Representative French Hill from Arkansas. Mr. Hill is the Vice Chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. He also serves on the Foreign Affairs and Intelligence Committee, and my neighbor to the south. It's great to have you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time and the invitation to have a member day. We're grateful to the leadership of this committee for letting us come and advocate for our ideas for this important committee. I'd like to talk today about the Social Security Disability Insurance Return to Work Act that I intend to introduce shortly. This is legislation that I've introduced in the past 4 Congresses, along with my fellow Arkansan Senator Tom Cotton, to strengthen the SSDI program and keep it solvent for current and future generations. SSDI is critical to a state like Arkansas, where more than 130,000 Arkansans receive benefits under this program. That's about 7.5% of our state's population relying on this important program. But nationally, the number of recipients receiving SSDI payments has also grown dramatically. From 1970, 2.7 million Americans to now 8.8 million Americans in 2022. Over that same period, spending on SSDI has grown from $3 billion to over $143 billion annually, meaning that the monthly payment recipients are receiving has nearly doubled, even when accounting for inflation. My bill aims to strengthen SSDI and ensure that the program remains viable to support future generations for citizens that truly require these services. In 2021, fewer than 66,000 total beneficiaries left the program because they'd found gainful employment that disqualified them from receiving any additional benefits. That, Mr. Chairman, is just 0.7% of the 8.8 million SSDI recipients. Each American has the capacity to contribute productively to their community and our economy. We must work with both employers and employees to encourage capable beneficiaries to leave the program and return to the workforce. This is like the private sector's approach on short-term versus long-term disability that private companies offer their own employees. SSDI should be crafted to reflect both short-term and long-term approaches to assistance. Those who do regain their independence and experience have more fulfillment in their lives, improved health, and better economics. My bill is straightforward. It creates classifications to assess a beneficiary's need to continue receiving benefits and measures increases continuing disability assessments along the way, notifying recipients about the Ticket to Work program when they first receive their benefits and then every 6 months afterwards. It also proposes to amend the Work Opportunity Tax Credit program to include qualified SSDI beneficiaries. By creating reasonable timelines for those expected to improve, incentivizing them to return to the workforce, SSDI can continue to serve as a temporary reprieve for those with work-prohibited disabilities, allow beneficiaries to earn more income, and facilitate a return to the workforce for millions of Americans, something that we desperately need across our 50 states. I'm committed to protecting SSDI for those who remain unable to work and supporting those who show improvement as they strive for greater freedom and opportunity for their families, themselves, and their careers. With Congress finally demonstrating some modest commitment to ending perpetual huge budget deficits, this body will be forced to make thoughtful looks at how we spend taxpayer dollars, evaluate what programs are working and worth that investment, and thinking about new critical safety nets that can be improved and operate much more effectively for our citizens. Congress has long abdicated its oversight responsibility for Social Security and the Social Security Disability Program. This must change. I hope this committee will consider changes to the SSDI program as we consider ways to improve the impact of the federal government's contributions and fulfill the promises that we've made to our country's most vulnerable citizens. I thank the chair, I thank the ranking member and the members of the committee, and it's really a great service that we do in Congress where we have members off committee, be hosted by our colleagues and have a member day, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for doing that, and it's an honor to serve with you. Yield back.
Representative, it's a pleasure for you to be here. We've had a lot of conversations. I've had personal conversations with your own governor in Arkansas in regards to SSDI, and with your Social Security administrator has actually even came up here and talked with us. And we're hopeful to have a subcommittee hearing very shortly in regards to a lot of your items that you're referring to. Mr. Schweikert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Victoria, you did. If there's ever a chance you could send one of your staffers over, we'd love to do a whiteboard with them. And French, I know of a company that's been trying to work with the SSDI population in regards to job placement. Will your legislation actually help sort of facilitate that type of connectivity of available populations to jobs?
It certainly would, because it engages, Mr. Schweikert, that population of people who could self-identify that they would be willing to go back to work under certain conditions. And I think the tax credit idea is helpful to that. Also, knowing that they're not penalized if they want to make that effort in connecting them back to work. And it's my philosophy I've had that in private business, we have short-term disability programs. They're typically paid for by the company. They're no cost to the employee. And then you buy at a very modest premium long-term disability, but we don't take that approach to the
You've talked about this for a while, but it's about the combination, okay, here's an incentive for the employer to take this population. But the other thing is the actual mechanism to connect the employee to an employer with whatever their issues are, because work is very different today than it was 30 years ago.
Right.
So,
well, I'll say in conclusion, look, I've met with the federal Social Security offices in Arkansas. I certainly know the director of the state's program that the chairman referenced. And there's tremendous frustration by our own federal employees in this program. I encourage every member, go interview your Social Security office somewhere in one of your counties in your district and ask them, do they think this program is helping people who truly need it? Or is it just opened up to a payment for people who know how to work the system?
Mr. Chairman, there was a trivia point a couple of years ago in a hearing in here that there was like 3 or 4 counties in the United States that actually had more people receiving this benefit than actually working. And I need to go dig that back up. French, thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I'm grateful to the chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. You are all now dismissed from the panel, and we will move to panel number 5. Perfect. I now recognize Representative Marilyn Strickland, the gentle lady from Washington State.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal, for having us here today for Member Day. First, I'd like to recognize and thank this committee's important oversight of paid family and medical leave. Back home in Washington State, we have paid leave, and new parents have the peace of mind knowing that they can care for their newborns at a very critical period of life without having to worry about missing a paycheck. We can also take time to care for family members with serious health conditions. Washingtonians with temporary serious health conditions can use the state's program to continue to pay their bills while they heal. For our military service members, our state program lets them spend time with a family member who is soon to be deployed overseas or is just returning from overseas deployment. Paid leave is a great relief to families in my home state, and it would be a great relief to families across the entire nation. That's why from day one, I've been a co-sponsor of Congresswoman DeLauro's Family Act, H.R. 3481, which will provide paid family and medical leave at the national level. Military deployments, surgeries, newborns, these are stressful times, and the Family Act is our opportunity to relieve some of that stress and give our constituents security. The security of knowing that they can be with their spouse who just got back from an overseas deployment. It's okay to get that procedure they've been holding off on because they will not miss out on a paycheck. Mr. Chairman, I respectfully request that you advance this very important issue. Another way we can provide peace of mind and security to our constituents is by empowering them to make their own health care decisions. That includes making reproductive health care safe, affordable, and available to those who want it. But it also includes making sure that kidney patients and all who need dialysis can get it how and where they need to. As a strong advocate for kidney health, I am proud to be working with Chairman Smith and Representative Carol Miller on the Improving Access to Home Dialysis Act. This bill will provide for reimbursement through Medicare for in-home assistance and produce recommendations for improving access to home dialysis for communities of color. Many patients who need dialysis lack access to reliable transportation, resulting in missed treatments and worse health outcomes. By empowering patients to get dialysis where they choose, our communities will be healthier and safer. I want to thank Chairman Smith and Rep. Miller for their partnership, and I thank former Representative Bobby Rush for his leadership on this very critical issue. And then lastly, I ask that you consider H.R. 2788, the American Investment in Manufacturing Act, or the AIM Act, to bring needed tax relief to small businesses. American manufacturers need help, and they cannot afford to wait. Prior to 2022, businesses could deduct 30% of earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, known as EBITDA. And that was not only a national standard, but it is an international standard. American businesses relied on this deduction to pay off loans and continue to invest in themselves and their employees. This will help them increase manufacturing capacity and be competitive on the global market. The businesses now will be unable to deduct depreciation and amortization at the worst possible time. With supply chain shortages, higher material costs, and higher rates for loans, there are now barriers to expanding capital-reliant manufacturing. The AIM Act, led by Representatives Adrian Smith and Joe Morelli, will make it easier for capital-intensive companies, especially manufacturing, to finance growth. As you know, the manufacturing economy is crucial to growing our domestic workforce, enhancing our competition, and ensuring future economic growth across the entire country. President Biden and his administration are committed to returning manufacturing jobs back here to America, to our home. This bill aligns with these goals by allowing American manufacturers to onshore even more manufacturing jobs and supporting the over 450,000 Americans employed in manufacturing. This bill can mean the difference between leading or falling behind in the global marketplace. The AIM bill has bipartisan support, and Mr. Chairman, I respectfully ask that you advance this legislation. Thank you very much for your time today, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative, for being here. Mr. Snyder?
I just want to say thank you for taking the time to come and present your thoughts. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
We will now recognize Representative August Pfluger, the gentleman from the great state of Texas. Mr. Pfluger is a graduate of the Air Force Academy and spent 20 years as a decorated fighter pilot. It's great to have you before the best committee in Congress.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. That might be debatable, but for today, during the purposes of this discussion, absolutely. No, thank you for providing the members the opportunity to share our priorities for this Congress. I'm proud to represent the world's largest secure supply of energy, the Permian Basin. It accounts for over 40% of all crude oil production and almost 20% of natural gas production, and the region is absolutely the epicenter of our domestic energy production and a geostrategic tool for national security. Last Congress, some lawmakers pushed to remove essential provisions for energy producers like intangible drilling cost, IDCs, which are a crucial tool for weathering a volatile and unpredictable industry. The ability of independent oil and gas exploration and production companies to deduct IDCs in the same way other businesses deduct business expenses is absolutely crucial and key to a company's ability to lower the cost of capital for domestic production activity. The Inflation Reduction Act imposes a book minimum tax on American companies, but companies are still able to reduce their taxable income by the amount of depreciation deductions they're already receiving through traditional corporate income tax. However, the oil and gas industry, who utilize IDCs, is treated punitively by the corporate alternative minimum tax. This is just one of the many issues that the corporate alternative minimum tax poses for energy producers, specifically in the oil and gas industry. IDCs are not loopholes, they're not credits, they're not subsidies. In fact, the expensing of IDCs allows companies to recoup such costs as labor, equipment rentals, pad preparation, and other expenditures for which there is no salvage value. In fact, over 80% of IDCs are associated with labor cost. Our nation's tax code is designed to levy taxes on net profits, not dollars used for ordinary and necessary cost or capital expenditures. The elimination of the current expensing of IDCs would drastically increase the cost associated with these high-risk and high-cost projects and would result in less domestic production of our own energy, jeopardizing our nation's economic and national security. Unfortunately, there are many punitive policies that this body must address, and thank you, by the way, Chairman, for doing that work. For decades, millions of retired public servants, including police officers, firefighters, and teachers, have had their Social Security checks unfairly docked because of an antiquated formula. Every month, retired public servants risk their benefits being reduced due to windfall elimination provision. At a time when so many are already struggling to keep up with inflation, this money goes a long way. And our public servants deserve better. Those who have spent decades paying into Social Security should not be treated differently because they made a decision to serve their community. I'm proud to support Jody Arrington's legislation, H.R. 5342, to update Social Security's formula to fully compensate our teachers, firefighters, and police officers for the time they worked in the private sector and the taxes they paid into the system. And I urge the committee to take action on this bipartisan legislation. Lastly, it's imperative that our Congress and the Ways and Means Committee work to advance trade policies that prioritize American agribusinesses. Due to the previous administration's commitment to freer and fairer trade agreements, we made significant market improvements, and it's imperative we continue to ensure American agricultural exporters and many other sectors of our economy receive the full benefit of the improved trade deals with vigilant enforcement. Additionally, we must be in constant pursuit of new global markets for our farmers and ranchers. With worldwide demand for food on the rise, we must ensure that there is no one better equipped to lead the charge of feeding a hungry world than American producers. For several years, American business owners, farmers, ranchers, and energy producers have faced the threat of having the tax code weaponized against them and being left behind in the global marketplace. It's important that we work to bolster American competitiveness domestically and internationally, and I look forward to working with you. The last thing I'll say is thank you to this committee for helping out with a tax policy, the death tax policy, by increasing those provisions. And I know that we're coming up against, in the next year or so, that law again. The supercharged death tax and any changes to step-in basis will be detrimental not only to agricultural producers, to families, but to Main Street businesses and especially to the energy industry. Chairman, I appreciate the work that you've done. Everything that I've talked about here today, I believe, is a national security issue. The production of our own energy, the production of our own food, the ability for families that know how to do agriculture business, to be able to continue to do that is so vital. We cannot be dependent on our adversaries for energy and for food, and this committee absolutely stands in the gap to protect our domestic production. With that, thank you for allowing me to speak to you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. Our priority on this committee is to make sure that our country is secure when it comes to our energy, our food, and our health care. We cannot be reliant on countries, especially the ones who love to burn our flags. So we appreciate you being here. I now recognize Representative Mike Waltz from the great state of Florida. Mike is the first Green Beret to be ever elected to Congress. He has been awarded 4 Bronze Stars and was a White House and Pentagon advisor in the Bush administration. It's a pleasure to serve with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Thank you, Ranking Member Neal. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of my 2 bills under your committee's jurisdiction. The first is H.R. 1568, the Moving Americans Privacy Protection Act. This bill is bipartisan and it's bicameral, and it would require U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, CBP, to remove personally identifiable information, PII, including Social Security numbers and including passport numbers from cargo manifests before public disclosure. The legislation passed the Senate under unanimous consent this March. Currently, in the current environment, CBP requires manifest sheets, which include PII, in order to disclose and document the cargo of incoming vessels for obvious customs and security purposes. The original intent of the requirement was to increase competition, facilitate better public analysis of import trends, allow port authorities, transportation companies more easily identify potential customers and changes in the industry. However, in recent years, the PII of relocating individuals, importantly, Mr. Chairman, including military members who are moving from overseas, that their PII, their Social Security numbers, their passport numbers are being released publicly. That has resulted in identity theft, credit card fraud, and makes collection by our adversaries, from terrorist organizations to foreign intelligence organizations, easy. They literally just have to log into CBP's website and collect the PII of not just our military members, but any American who is identified on these manifests. So I think the fix here is obvious and necessary, and all we're asking is that PII be stripped before public disclosure for all of the reasons listed. So this bill is supported by the American Trucking Association, the International Association of Movers, the Military Officers Association of America, and the National Association of Realtors, among others, and I ask for the committee's support. The second bill, H.R. 529, is extending the limits of U.S. Customs and Waters Act to extend the customs waters territory of the United States from 12 to 24 nautical miles from the coastline of the United States. This bill is also bipartisan, it's also bicameral, and it would update several existing laws and extend the U.S.'s contiguous zone from 12 nautical mile limit of the U.S. Customs and Waters to 24 nautical miles. And by extending CBP's jurisdiction to the nearshore waters, it would double its area of operation, and it would align CBP's maritime operations offshore with what the Coast Guard already has and with what NOAA already has. So Coast Guard and NOAA adopted these extensions several years ago. CBP did not. This bill would rectify that mistake. And with modern technology, just as an aside, the performance and speed of maritime vessels, particularly those fast boats and others used by illegal or illicit smugglers, is exceeding the abilities of our law enforcement, particularly when they're restricted only to 12 miles. So by extending these waters out to 24, it aligns all of our law enforcement entities and it gives CBP double the amount of time to interdict illicit drugs, human trafficking, fentanyl, all of those illicit activities that are happening in our coastline. And I'll just conclude with this, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. We talk a lot about, and rightly so, about our 2,000 miles of southern border. Our coastline in the United States is 95,000 miles. Right now, just in the Caribbean, between the Navy, the Coast Guard, and Customs and Border Patrol, they're only able to interdict 10% of what they identify on radar. So 90% of what they identify on radar as illicit activities gets through. And this would be helpful to rectify that. I ask for your support in marking this up, and I thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate all of your really important pieces of legislation, and hopefully we can get something done. So I now recognize Representative Maria Salazar, the gentlelady from Florida. Ms. Salazar is the daughter of Cuban exiles, a 5-time Emmy Award journalist, and is the only U.S. Spanish language journalist to have ever interviewed Fidel Castro. It's a pleasure to have you before our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My pleasure to be here and for allowing me to participate in this very important hearing. Trading has always been one of the strongest competitive advantages of our country because of the size of our economy and the dynamism of our marketplace. We foster capitalism, we embrace democracy, and we export our moral values. But unfortunately, at this hour, we're not the only ticket in the hemisphere. We have watched China aggressively enter both established and emerging markets. We, the United States, were motivated to trade for profits, but the Chinese, because they're communists, are motivated to acquire power. We have seen their tactics, offering low-quality goods, utilizing slave labor, and destroying the environment. Let me tell you, in the last 20 years, they have secured a very robust presence in Latin America through a Trojan horse strategy that has become the #1 trading power in the region. I'm going to repeat it to you. Did you hear me? Our hemisphere is being invaded by China, and they are now the #1 trading power in the region. 20 years ago, they traded $12 billion. 20 years later, last year, they hit $450 billion. That is a 3,000% increase, 3,000% increase. Right now, China has free trade agreements with Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Peru, and another one with Uruguay is on the way. South America, specifically in South America, they have surpassed the United States as the top trading partner. We're talking about the Chinese are the top trading partners in South America. 10 years from now, China's trade with Latin America will be $700 billion. That is trade, not loans. In the last 20 years, China has lent almost $150 billion to the region. And of course, not only that, they're lending money, but they're helping our enemies, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. 21 Latin American countries have signed into China's nefarious Belt and Road Initiative. Today, they control key ports in Peru, railroads in Argentina, airports in Honduras, dams in Ecuador, and critical rare earth materials in Bolivia. This is a major security risk for the United States. Needless to say, there are bad actors with bad intentions. We are the opposite. But I have good news, and that's the reason why I'm here today. It's called the America's Act. And what does it do? It puts the United States of America back on top. It sends the message to every Latin American country that I have visited personally as a news reporter. If you play by the rules, if you fight political corruption, and if you reduce your dependence on China, you will join, you, meaning Latin American country, you will join what is called the gold standard of international trade, called USMCA. Mexico has it, Canada has it, you could have it too. I'm honored to have worked with the creator of this monumental legislation, Senator Bill Cassidy. Our intention is to unleash unprecedented prosperity throughout the region. And the bill has 5 pillars: trade and partnership. You, Latin American country, will have the opportunity to join the United States, Mexico, and Canada in a free trade agreement with all its benefits and have access to $60 billion in investment capital from the United States. Nearshoring and reshoring. The bill creates a program to help American industries relocate from China either back to the United States or to any other country in our hemisphere. There will be loans, grants, and tax incentives to help companies move back home. Number 3, strategic investments. Those $60 billion that I just mentioned will create an unbreakable supply chain from Patagonia in Argentina to Alaska in the United States to make sure we're not dependent on China any longer. Let's suppose we get another COVID. God permit it will not happen, but we will have antibiotics. We will not have to be depending on the Chinese. In addition, we will get cheap, affordable energy coming from our hemisphere partners, whether it will be Guyana or Ecuador or Texas. It doesn't matter. It's in our hemisphere. Transparency and rule of law. Number 4, for our neighbors, we will make it easy to do business with you in a clean, transparent, non-corrupt way. In other words, the American way. To give confidence to the American business sector that you can invest and it will be secured. You invest in Latin America. In other words, accountability will be guaranteed. And finally, we're going to be promoting American values. We're going to establish the American University of the Americas to promote United States values and increase educational opportunities to the Latin Americas. If we employ this framework, we will win the trade war in our backyard. But if, on the contrary, we sit back, we will watch Mandarin replace English, and English will not be spoken in Latin America any longer. Finally, with this legislation, Senator Cassidy, myself, and the United States Congress will be sending a very clear message to our neighbors in the hemisphere. We want to work with you as much as you want to work with us. Hispanics, Latin Americans prefer the Americans over the Russians or the Chinese any day of the year. Now it's up to Latin Americans to behave accordingly so they can be part of the club of the top economic players. I look forward to work with you, Mr. Chairman, in making this legislation a reality and being able to stop the situation we have at the border, because we need to keep those Latin American boys and girls home. I thank you very much for the opportunity, and you back.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for being here today. It is a priority of this hemisphere in regards to trading partners. That's why my very first congressional delegation that I led as chairman was to Mexico, Ecuador, and Guyana, because it's extremely important of our presence and to continue to grow. Your numbers that you gave in regards to China increasing 3,000% is unacceptable, and we have to do something as a Congress to address that. So thank you for being here.
And I do want to say that Latin Americans would do business with the Americans at any time, any place, over the Chinese and the Russians. And I know it very well. And I thank you for the opportunity and to put this together.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative or Chairman Mark Green from Tennessee for being before us. He's the great chairman of our House Homeland Security, and pleased to have you.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, and it's great to see you in the chair. I recall us rehearsing the night before. That was fond memories. And thank you, Ranking Member Neal, for this opportunity to testify to the committee about my bills addressing the concerning conditions of our rural health care systems. I know that many of you have heard the same sobering stories from constituents, physicians, hospitals, administrators, and parents. Our rural hospitals are entering a financial and workforce crisis. And as an emergency care physician and the former CEO of an emergency department management and staffing company, I know firsthand how desperate the situation has become, and it's only gotten worse in the recent years. My home state of Tennessee is greatly impacted by rural hospital closures and limited access to emergency medicine. According to U.S. News and World Report, Tennessee has seen more hospital closures than any other state besides Texas. In fact, the Tennessee Hospital Association estimates that as many as 45% of Tennessee's hospitals are at risk for closure. This is an impending disaster, not just for the loss of care in those communities, but also the loss of jobs. Often the hospitals are the largest employer in their communities. In order to combat this worrying trend, I've introduced 3 pieces of legislation as part of my broader rural health care initiative. Firstly, let's start with H.R. 1128, the Rural Health Care Access Act, which is endorsed by the National Rural Health Association and the National Association of Rural Health Clinics. This bill targets rural hospital closures by expanding the federal definition of critical access hospitals. According to the American Hospital Association, over 130 rural hospitals across the country closed their doors from 2010 to 21, and according to a GAO report from December 2020, the median distance of travel rural patients drive to receive care increased by 20 miles, adding an ever-expanding barrier to essential inpatient and emergency care. The Rural Health Care Access Act repeals the 35-mile rule, arbitrarily selected, I might add, that prevents many rural hospitals from receiving a critical access hospital designation if they're less than 35 miles away from another hospital. This bill does not change any other requirement for hospitals to receive critical access designation. The 35-mile rule is the only change we're making to federal law. Hospitals that wish to receive this designation will still have to be designated as rural, only provide acute care, and primarily host patients for less than 96 hours. These critical access hospitals receive cost-based reimbursement from Medicare, greater flexibility for staffing and service requirements, and access to a variety of grant opportunities. This bill will help reduce the financial vulnerability of these rural critical hospitals, which often provide essential medical services in rural communities like the ones that I represent. My second piece of legislation targets a specific issue in hospital systems, emergency departments. H.R. 1129, the Rural ER Access Act, would repeal federal regulation, note regulation, that prohibits freestanding emergency departments from operating more than 35 miles from a hospital. This 35-mile rule, again arbitrarily selected, was instituted in the 1990s to monitor the safety of ER patients. HHS was concerned that if ERs opened too far from a self-standing hospital, then emergency patients would not have other medical options should the self-standing ER department fail in its mission to treat and triage. However, speaking as an ER physician who practiced medicine in rural areas across the nation, I know how advanced our medical technology is today, and I know how desperate some situations are. This antiquated rule is now hindering patient access rather than saving patient lives. By eliminating this mileage requirement, freestanding ERs would be able to provide frontline emergency care to rural communities that most desperately need it. During an emergency, these facilities can provide a crucial safety net, especially in rural communities where the nearest hospital is many miles away. Further, keeping an ER, should a hospital have to close, keeps jobs in a community. We also need to address the workforce burnout amongst medical providers by enacting H.R. 5213, the Reducing Medical Unnecessary Delays in Care Act. This legislation is endorsed by the Medical Group Management Association and the American Academy of Family Physicians, and it seeks to unburden our doctors from the bureaucratic red tape that is prior authorization. According to the Medical Group Management Association, 72% of medical groups report that clinicians assigned to complete their peer-to-peer reviews by the plans are not from a relevant specialty to the treatment or disease in question, resulting in dangerous delays and flat-out denials. In order to combat this worrying trend and reduce unnecessary delays in care, this bill would reform the practice of prior authorization in Medicare and Medicare Advantage. If my legislation becomes law, only board-certified physicians in the relevant specialty would be the ones making the important decisions about care. Specifically, it would also direct Medicare, Medicare Advantage, and Medicare Part D plans to comply with requirements and restrictions and must be based on medical necessity and written clinical criteria. And I'm going to break from my script for just a second to say this. When a physician reaches out to a health insurance or the Medicare for permission to do a procedure that it wants to do for its patient, they're oftentimes talking to someone who has no medical license, no care, and that individual makes the medical decision to take something off the table that the physician can use to heal that particular disease process. That is a medical decision. If there are 5 ways to heal something and the insurer or the Medicare or Medicaid patient or administrators take 3 of those away, that's a medical decision. And what this bill does is it says a physician that normally treats that type of disease should be the one making the decision at Medicare and Medicaid. What all these bills do is aim to restore our rural health system and save our doctors from needless paperwork. With this committee's help, I'm excited to get our medical system back on track. And finally, Mr. Chairman, and I know I've gone a little long, as a representative of Music City, I want to mention the HELP, Independent Track Succeed Act, HITS Act, which I have co-sponsored the past 3 Congresses and is so crucial for independent creators in Nashville who author and produce the hits we know and love. This bill makes much needed reforms to the tax code to ensure these creators receive the same treatment that other creative industries already get. I hope the committee can mark up this legislation in the near future. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. This past Monday, I spent a whole day traveling throughout my congressional district in just listening sessions, roundtable after roundtable in healthcare. And rural healthcare, access to healthcare is my top priority, and I love your common sense pieces of legislation in eliminating arbitrary caps for critical access hospitals and freestanding clinics. It doesn't make sense that a bureaucrat was able to just make sure that those were implemented. Whenever I look at the Boot Hill of Missouri and I see that a hospital closed in Kennett, but it could not be a critical access hospital because another hospital just in another county was less than 35 miles. It has huge impacts, and I hope members of Congress will wake up and do something right. But thank you for being here. With that, we'll go to the next panel, panel number 6.
How you doing? Good. How are you? How are you, sir? This big ass font. You guys make me look bad.
What's that?
You guys are younger than me, and you guys have smaller fonts. What's going on with that?
I don't know.
Look at this.
We're trying to be, I'll tell you why. We're trying to be green and not to kill as many trees. That's why we're following your lead. We are. Yeah.
I'm moved.
Thank you all. I now recognize Mr. Rudy Yackham, the gentleman from Indiana. Mr. Yackham is a 4th-generation Hoosier who filled a seat that was previously held by a dear friend of this committee, Ms. Jackie Wolarski. She let us know what she thought about Hoosier country all the time, so it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity that you and Ranking Member Neal are providing those of us not on the Ways and Means Committee to present the priorities of our constituents. I'm proud to represent the hardworking Hoosiers of Indiana's 2nd District. We're home to a dynamic economy, including some of America's top manufacturers, medical innovators, farmers and ranchers, and so much more. They all have a stake in our country's policies pertaining to tax, trade, healthcare, and economic opportunity. Many of the members of this committee knew my predecessor, Jackie Wolarski, a cherished and respected Ways and Means member who was taken from us all too soon. And if you knew Jackie, many of the priorities that I'll be highlighting will sound very familiar. The 2nd District is the epicenter of the recreational vehicle industry. About 85% of RVs on the road come from Elkhart County and the surrounding area inside my district. That's why one of my top priorities is the passage of my bill, H.R. 3624, the Travel, Trailer, and Camper Tax Parity Act. The exemption of floor plan financing from interest deductibility changes in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act solved an issue for many car and equipment dealerships across the country. However, it inadvertently left out non-motorized towable RVs, which are about 88% of RVs sold. This has forced RV dealers to maintain two separate sets of books, one for motorized and the other for non-motorized RVs. H.R. 3624 would correct this unintended consequence and allow dealers to focus less on unnecessary paperwork and more on selling RVs to Americans looking to explore the natural beauty of our great nation. Another priority is the reauthorization of the Generalized System of Preferences, or GSP program. As you might imagine, an RV has a unique and complex supply chain. The industry buys American whenever it can, but there are certain things that it simply can't. Luan wood is an example of this. It's a tropical wood found almost exclusively in Southeast Asia. Luan is water resistant and lightweight, which makes it ideal for the lining of an RV. It outperforms the other types of plywood on the market, providing superior durability and fuel economy. Luan entered duty-free under GSP starting in 2019. However, since the program expired at the end of 2020, RV manufacturers resumed paying over $1 million a month in unnecessary tariffs. I support a long-term extension of GSP to help RV manufacturers in my district, as well as other companies seeking to diversify their supply chains away from China. A third priority is Mr. LaHood and Ms. Delbene's bill, H.R. 3238, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. Inflation, supply chain disruptions, and rising interest rates have made it more and more difficult to find affordable housing. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the LaHood-Delbene bill because it would enhance a proven tool that has successfully encouraged private investment in affordable housing. Finally, across my district, I hear about the need for tax certainty. I hope we can work toward permanent, stable tax policy to give families the certainty to plan their finances and businesses and farmers the certainty to plan investments. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Yakum. We appreciate you being here and pushing priorities that your predecessor had fought for a long time. So I now recognize Representative Carbajal, the gentleman from California. Mr. Carbajal sits on the Committee of Armed Services, T&I, Agriculture, and T&I is where he serves as the ranking member of the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Committee. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. I'm here today to encourage your committee to consider and pass a bipartisan bill that I wrote with my colleague, Republican colleague, Lori Chavez de Remer from Oregon, as well as small business owners on the Central Coast of California. I'm sure there are many people here today that will claim that their bills are simple and straightforward, but our bill, the Child Care Investment Act, really is. We are just trying to make sure that the federal child care tax incentives already in our tax code are actually working. We already have a current tax credit set up to help businesses offer child care as an incentive when hiring and retaining workers. We just want to update it and expand the ways they can provide that child care. Yes, we already have a tax structure set up for families to save for child care tax-free. This legislation updates the cap on the child care FSAs, which in this case are called Dependent Care Assistance Plans, to keep up the current cost of care. Keep in mind, these caps have not been updated since the 1980s, and we already have tax credits to help working families who may be struggling to cover child care expenses. We just want to make sure this tax credit is updated and keeping up with inflation. The Child Care Investment Act has the support of multiple different chambers of commerce from my district, as well as the First 5 Years Fund, the Bipartisan Policy Center, and the Early Care and Education Consortium. And it's my understanding the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is also supportive of these types of policies. And did I mention it's bipartisan? Childcare, without a doubt, is a pressing economic issue. It keeps families out of the workforce if they can't find the care they need. It prevents businesses from hiring, expanding, or operating at the levels they want if they cannot find the workers they need. As this committee considers updating our tax code to support our small businesses and working families, I hope you will consider including this common sense bipartisan bill. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. Appreciate your attendance today in regards to this piece of legislation. Providing for working class families is a huge priority of mine as chairman, and I look forward to looking into more of this legislation.
Thank you.
Mr. Whitman, it's a pleasure to have you before the House Ways and Means Committee. Mr. Whitman is the gentleman from Virginia. He's a member of the House Natural Resources Committee, the Select Committee on China, and the Armed Services Committee. It's a pleasure to have you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you so much to the committee for allowing me to speak today on H.R. 1477, the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act. We see the world around us today, and we know we have to have a strong, well-rounded, and properly skilled workforce in order to make sure we're successful in what has become a global competition. In this increasingly technical world where we have to digitize things and where we know that advanced skills are critical, it's vital that we have workforce development opportunities for folks to be able to develop those skills. We know if they're going to have those well-paying jobs, we know if they're going to be able to support their families, we know if they're going to add to economic growth in their communities, they have to have these skills. If we look at America's workforce today, we see that of the jobs in the future, 60% of those jobs will not require a 2- or 4-year degree, but they will require post-secondary education. Much of that education is very specialized. Another element we have to remember, too, is that we think sometimes, disparagingly on that additional training that's needed post-high school or post-secondary education. We look and go, oh, that's only, hundreds of dollars here or there. That's not a big difference. Mr. Chairman, for an individual or a family that's working on a fixed income, hundreds of dollars might as well be thousands of dollars. It denies them the opportunity that they need to get the skills and education that allow them to advance. We want them to have those opportunities. If you look at the statistics, let's take the Virginia Department of Labor statistics from 2021. We saw that 72% of Virginians surveyed said that they were interested in completing training that would enhance their job-related skills. Despite the decline of what is being offered now by employers are offering much fewer opportunities to get that advanced education necessary to advance your skill set. It's clear that the American people want options in order to pursue this additional training. And that's the main reason why I introduced the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act. This legislation makes certification and credentialing programs eligible for 529 savings account use. So it's not just now, under this bill, limited to 2- and 4-year degrees. It would be for any post-secondary education. It would also include things like not just tuition, but also exam costs, supply costs related to workforce training. Many times when you're, let's say, go to a welding course, you need to bring certain tools and supplies with you. This allows those accounts to be used for more than just 2- and 4-year degrees. Under the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act, too, the credentialing and certification programs that would be eligible are also ones that are certified. They are certified under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act and accredited by the National Commission on Certifying Agencies, the American National Standards Institute, or ones that are identified by the Department of Labor regulations or guidelines. And these will be deemed as eligible uses. So it puts specific limitations on it. I know folks have said, well, you have to worry about some programs just being there to take students' money. No, this is going to assure that these are credentialed programs that provide value, provide education that results in a certification or credential that is necessary in a field in order for somebody to get enhanced job opportunities. This distinction, I think, really reduces the uncertainty for 529 savings account users and for regulators. So we know that if it's eligible, parents don't have to worry about are their dollars going to a use that's going to provide value for their child. Mr. Chairman, I'm really committed to the success and development of our workforce, and I believe that this will do an incredible amount to be able to do that. Tomorrow, there's a group called Tomorrow's Workforce Coalition. It's over 500 different organizations. They are in full support of this bill. We have approaching 70 co-sponsors for the bill. This is really, I think, gaining traction because people look at this and go, yes, why can't we use those 529 savings accounts, the dollars that parents set aside tax-free? Mr. Chairman, as I talk to parents across, not just Virginia, but across the nation, I asked them by a show of hands, I said, when you begin saving for your child, which most of the time is when they're in middle school, how many of you know where your child is going to be in their process of selecting post-secondary education when you start saving? Not a single hand in the room goes up. But they want to make sure that those dollars that they save and have the tax advantage to can be used for anything that their child wants to pursue, even if they're not sure what it is early on, and that it may not be a 2 or 4 year degree program. So I would urge strongly the committee to reflect upon where the needs are of our workforce, where the desires are of our working families, of our parents, of industry, of folks that say, this is what we need for a workforce, this is what parents want to have an opportunity for their children, this is what we need to do to make sure those resources are available to assure that our families continue to have those opportunities and our workforce grows with those skills. So I would urge the committee to seriously consider H.R. 1477, the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act, and should consider any changes to the 529 savings account as part of a process that will result in more opportunities for individuals and for our workforce in the future. So, Mr. Chairman, thanks again. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the consideration.
Congressman, thank you for being here. I'm a strong believer that there are many different educational paths for Americans to take, and we need to make sure that our tax code does not incentivize one path more than the other. They all should be treated the same. So I appreciate your testimony today. It's good to now recognize Representative John James to the House Ways and Means Committee. Representative James is from Michigan, graduated from the United States Military Academy, and served 8 years in the Army, participating in multiple tours of duty in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and is an Apache pilot. We're glad you're here.
Americans feel like
I think your microphone's off. Just got to push the button.
Rookie mistake. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, there is a hopelessness crisis in this country. Americans feel like everything is broken, nothing's working for them. That's why recent polling shows 74% of Americans feel like we are heading in the wrong direction. I'm in my district, and I talk to families who are deeply disenchanted with the government. They wonder if anyone's working for them. They wonder if anybody cares. Well, I know we care. And Mr. Chairman, I echo your sentiments that there should be many pathways to prosperity, particularly through education. And I'm here to urge support in those sentiments of H.R. 531, Educational Choice for Children Act, and my bill, H.R. 4520, Reignite Hope Act. First, education. We must put our children first, not teachers' unions, not D.C. politicians, our children. I want all schools to be successful, Mr. Chairman. Public schools, private schools, charter schools, home schools, vocational schools. I truly believe that where parents have choice, children have a chance. Parents deserve to send their children where they will be safest and most successful, where they'll have outcomes that are not determined by their zip code. Because we all in this body, in our Republican majority, believe that a quality education is a basic civil right. So regardless of our political stripes, party ideology, one thing is clear. School choice goes the farthest in addressing this hopelessness epidemic. and it ranks high among Americans, especially American parents. In fact, a recent study found that school choice has support of 80% of Republicans, 60% of Democrats, and 69% of independents. I don't know a single parent out there who doesn't want more choice when it comes to their child's education. For this reason, I'm proud to sit here today and voice my strong support for H.R. 531. H.R. 531 isn't just a bill, it's a game changer for millions of children around the country, many of whom have no other option. In fact, we've seen the impact of choice at the state level, with 25 states greenlighting similar programs to provide families with more choice, not less. Not only is this bill common sense, it's a no-brainer. It's also good policy. It's the right thing to do. And it's about time that Congress and the President get on board with the desires of the parents of this nation. When this bill was brought to my attention, I was excited to co-sponsor for several reasons. This bill checks all the boxes. For starters, the Educational Choice for Children Act has garnered more support than any other school choice bill introduced in Congress ever. Second, this bill doesn't require any new spending. I repeat, no new spending. There's something that we need to do more of here in Washington. Third, this bill doesn't increase the size or scope of government. Lastly, it tells the Department of Education to take a hike, empowering students and their parents where it should be at the lowest level in this nation. And it's about time. The choice is clear. Congress can do nothing, leaving millions of families and their children behind, or we can come together to put our families and students first, not special interests, and vote to send this bill to the President's desk. Families deserve a choice, and our students deserve a fighting chance. Anything less is unacceptable, un-American. I urge my colleagues to support not only H.R. 531, Educational Choice for Children Act, but also my bill, which is the Reignite Hope Act. The Reignite Hope Act, H.R. 4520, endeavors to increase child tax credit to $3,500 for each child 0 to 5 and $4,500 for each child 6 to 17. This is to help both parents who are struggling to make ends meet during these inflationary times and also help care workers to be able to afford to do the most important job in the world, to look after our children. It also provides a $3,500 tax credit for incentivizing the hiring of critical needs employees, helping boosting sectors of the economy desperate for workers. Nurses, caregivers, public safety officers. That's right, the police officers, firefighters, EMS put their lives on the line, and our caregivers who look after the mentally infirm, our children, and also our elderly would be getting a boost. Tax credits target areas in the greatest need in our opportunity zones all across the country, but specifically in my county, which has 17 of these zones in 6 communities: Clinton Township, East Point, Mount Clemens, Roseville, Sterling Heights, and Warren, making this a district-focused and America-first policy. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time to speak with you here today, and I urge the support of my colleagues on these 2 bills. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman, for being here. We do plan over the next couple months to have a hearing in regards to education freedom, which is extremely important for all Americans. And so I think you'll be happy where we're leading with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize the Representative Clay Higgins, the gentleman from Louisiana. Mr. Higgins is an Army veteran and law enforcement officer serving on the House Homeland Security Committee and Oversight and Accountable Committees. It's great to have you with us, Mr. Higgins.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for taking your personal time to allow members to speak before your committee on our individual bills. We recognize it's incredibly time-consuming and requires great dedication from you. So thank you for giving me a chance to speak for a minute. There's an appropriate role, Mr. Chairman, for regulatory enforcement and authority reflective of that enforcement within the federal government. There's a requirement to balance the rights of our individual citizens across the country and every sovereign state to feel safe and secure in their properties, their business, their residence, etc. They should not feel threatened by their federal government. So my bill, H.R. 4416, called the No Funds for Armed Regulators Act of 2023, was born of my own interactions with constituents that, to my horror, I discovered once I came to Congress 7 years ago. This was It's a far too regular theme where regulators from, especially from the IRS, the DOL, and the EPA, will roll into a private business, or in many cases a farm, in an unmarked police car. Is unexpected, unannounced visit. This farmer sees this car coming up the long gravel driveways. It recognizes maybe it's a police car, but what are they doing here? And two unknown agents get out, and they're armed. And they have quite an attitude in most cases, my investigation has revealed. And they're there to enforce this regulation or that regulation. And that individual American at that time is fearful and intimidated, and it's an unnecessary intrusion into their lives and oppression of the sanctity of their business and their home in the interest of enforcing a regulation. So a regulator has every right to perform within the parameters of the law, to do his job. But he doesn't have to be armed. That's a bridge too far. For these armed agents from the IRS, the EPA, DOL, rolling into a private American's life, frightening that American, scaring that family, it's uncalled for. It's literally the most extreme weaponization of the federal government against American people. If a regulator thinks he has a problem with an American citizen, he can call local law enforcement. It used to happen all the time, all the time. The regulator was going on to a land, wasn't exactly sure how to get there, maybe long gravel roads, et cetera, especially in agricultural areas. They'd call the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office would send a deputy and escort them out there. No problem. That family, that farmer knows that sheriff, recognizes that car. That's his sheriff. That's his deputy. And it's much more of a peaceful engagement. But things have changed over the last several years, and it's responsibility of Congress to fix it. So quite simply, my bill would disarm these armed regulators they do have a job to do, but just like your city code enforcement or your county code enforcement, could you imagine your city code enforcement having a report that say the gate on the fence around your pool was off the hinges? So can you imagine an armed team showing up at your home to roll into your backyard to observe your broken gate and give you a citation? That's the kind of regulatory enforcement we're dealing with that we have to put the brakes on. So my bill would spend less money from the federal government and help to restore the sanctity and individual rights and freedoms of individual Americans across the country. I urge broad bipartisan support to this bill. It should pass Congress. It's the right thing to do, and I'm prayerful that my colleagues will support the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak.
Mr. Higgins, thanks for your testimony. A few years ago, I was visiting a business in our congressional district, and I will never forget that after we toured the business, we went into the office, and all of a sudden, two regulators walked in while I was there, armed with their badges, and the faces on those business owners that I saw when they walked in, fearful of what was going on, and they happened to be with revenue. So I've seen it firsthand of how it can displace a regular propane distributor minding their own business, and it wasn't even there for them. So thank you. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for this legislation. I'm pleased to recognize Mr. Matt Rosendale from the great state of Montana. Matt was a member of the Montana House and Montana Senate, and I think you served as majority leader when you were there, and also the auditor of Montana before you came to Congress. So a pleasure to have you in the House Ways and Means Committee.
It is a pleasure to be here for my maiden voyage before you, Chairman Smith. I appreciate it. And very similar to my colleague from Louisiana, I too have piece of legislation that I would like to introduce that describes and tries to eliminate the ability for our regulators to be armed. My bill would prohibit President Biden's weaponized Internal Revenue Service from using taxpayers' dollars to purchase firearms for the agents. Recently, 20 IRS agents with full body armor and ARs conducted a raid at the Highwood Creek Outfitters in Great Falls, Montana. Not the ATF, the IRS. There was one ATF agent in attendance with them, but there were 20 IRS agents. I'm convinced that this was done not only to intimidate the owner of that facility, but they were completely armed and outfitted with body armor and took possession of his property for the day. This was to intimidate the customer base that he had long established in the city of Great Falls for many years so that they could see, you better not mess with the IRS or this can happen to you as well. Very concerning to myself and to the entire community and to the residents of Montana. Biden's IRS has no business intimidating hardworking Montanans. Why does the IRS Need Guns Act would require that the IRS transfer all firearms and ammunition in the agency's possession to the General Services Administration within 120 days? From there, firearms and the ammunition can be auctioned off to be used to federal firearms licensees, with the proceeds being used to reduce the out-of-control federal deficit that we all are trying to address right now. Additionally, my legislation would shift the IRS Criminal Investigations Division within the Justice Department. The Biden-controlled IRS spent over $5 million on weaponry and tactical gear in 2021, and just last year began advertising job postings which listed, and I quote, "Carry a firearm and be willing to use deadly force as a major duty." This should scare every United States citizen. The American people are dealing with rising prices and a wide open border. They do not deserve to be threatened or harassed by overzealous, armed taxmen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you all very much. I want to thank my colleagues for being here today. As I've said previously, the Ways and Means Committee does not traditionally allow for non-committee members to participate in the committee's process, and I wanted to change that. I wanted to make sure we heard from the members' priorities throughout our entire conference, and today has been very beneficial to me as being chairman, to hearing directly your passion and why you care about the issues that we have before you, and hopefully we can get some things done. So please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. With that, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.